The woman stepping down wasn't her, wasn't the face from the faded photograph he'd studied every night for 3 months. His children pressed against his legs, expectant and trembling with hope, while this stranger with terrified eyes clutched a worn carpet bag like a shield. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, voice breaking. "There's been a terrible mistake." But the real mistake? It wasn't hers. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale of second chances travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The Wyoming wind carried dust and broken promises across the depot platform that September afternoon in 1887. Ethan Mercer stood rigid as fence post, his calloused hands resting on the shoulders of his 2 children, Tommy, barely 6, and little Sarah, just 4 years breathing air on this unforgiving earth. The boy's Sunday shirt was already coming untucked despite Ethan's best efforts that morning, and Sarah's blonde braids hung slightly crooked, tied with ribbons that would have made his late wife Margaret weep at their lopsided enthusiasm. 3 months. 3 months of letters exchanged with a woman named Eleanor Whitfield from Boston. A widow herself, she'd written. Educated, experienced with children, seeking a fresh start in the West. Her photograph showed a stern-faced woman with dark hair swept into a severe bun, eyes that suggested capability and no-nonsense practicality. Exactly what Ethan needed. Exactly what his children needed. Not love. He'd buried love 18 months ago when winter fever took Margaret from him, leaving him with 2 babies who cried for their mama in the night and a ranch that demanded every waking hour he possessed. He needed help. A partnership. Someone who could mother his children while he kept the cattle alive and the bank from foreclosing on the only home they'd ever known. The stage was late, as it usually was, but Ethan had learned patience the hard way these past years. Tommy shifted restlessly beside him, standing on his tiptoes to peer down the dusty road. "Papa, is she really coming, the new mama?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's coming to help take care of you both. That's all for now, son." "But you said—" "Tommy." His voice came out harder than he'd intended, and he felt the boy shrink slightly. Ethan softened his tone, awkward, as always, with comfort. Let's meet her first, see if it suits." In truth, the decision was already made. He'd paid for her passage west, $63 he could scarcely afford. They'd exchanged promises through those carefully worded letters, promises that felt businesslike and safe. Nothing like the wild, terrifying love he'd known with Margaret. This would be different, cleaner, a transaction that benefited all parties. The stage finally appeared through the heat shimmer, horses laboring up the final stretch to Redemption Station. The town barely deserved the name, a handful of weathered buildings clinging to existence where the railroad hadn't bothered to reach. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a church with a bell that no longer rang. This was the edge of civilization, where people came to disappear or to be remade. Ethan straightened his vest, suddenly conscious of his appearance. He'd worn his best shirt, though best was relative for a man who spent his days wrestling cattle and mending fence. His face was weathered beyond his 32 years, carved by sun and grief into something harder than he'd ever intended to become. The stage pulled to a stop in a cloud of dust and creaking leather. Old Bill Morrison, the driver, climbed down with the stiffness of a man who'd been sitting too long. "Afternoon, Ethan," Bill called, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Got your package from back east." Ethan's hands tightened on Tommy's shoulder. Package. As if Eleanor Whitfield were a piece of freight to be collected. But wasn't that exactly what this arrangement was? The stage door opened. A woman's hand emerged first, smaller than he'd expected, trembling slightly as it gripped the door frame. Then a boot, practical but worn at the heel, and then wrong. Everything was wrong. The woman who stepped down from the stage was young, far younger than Eleanor's 35 years. She couldn't have been more than 23 or 24, with auburn hair that caught the afternoon light like copper wire, escaping in wisps from a hastily pinned arrangement. Her face was pale beneath the dust of travel, eyes the color of summer grass wide with something that looked dangerously close to panic. She wore a simple gray traveling dress that had seen better days, clutching a carpet bag that appeared to contain everything she owned in this world. When her eyes met Ethan's across the platform, she froze like a rabbit spotting a hawk's shadow. "Mr. Mercer?" Her voice was soft, musical, nothing like the crisp Boston accent he'd expected. Ethan couldn't speak. His mind was cataloging all the wrongness, the age, the coloring, the way she held herself with a mixture of hope and terror that made his chest constrict with an emotion he couldn't name. "Papa?" Tommy tugged at his hand. "Is that her? Is that the lady from the letters?" "No." The word came out flat, final. Ethan took a step forward, his face hardening into the mask he wore when dealing with dishonest cattle buyers. "Who are you? Where's Eleanor Whitfield?" The young woman flinched as if he'd raised a hand to her. Her fingers tightened on the carpet bag until her knuckles went white. My name is Clara Hale. Mrs. Whitfield, She what?" Ethan's voice cut across the platform like a whip crack. Several townspeople who'd gathered to watch the stage arrival turned to stare, sensing drama. "Where's the woman I've been corresponding with? The woman I paid passage for?" Clara's throat worked as she swallowed hard. "Mrs. Whitfield became ill 2 days before departure. The agency... They said someone had to come. You'd already paid, and there was a contract, and I..." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I had nowhere else to go." The words hung in the dusty air between them. In the silence that followed, Ethan could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of his children's confusion pressing against his legs. He'd been deceived. Sent a substitute like day-old bread from the baker, and he was supposed to just accept it, just take this terrified girl into his home and his children's lives? "No." He took Tommy's hand, reaching for Sarah with the other. "This isn't what we agreed to. You can get right back on that stage when Bill's ready to leave." "Sir, please." Clara took a step forward, and Ethan saw her sway slightly, exhausted from the journey. "If you'll just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. I needed a woman with experience, with maturity, someone who could..." He stopped himself, painfully aware of the audience and his children's upturned faces. "This won't work. I'm sorry you came all this way, but you'll have to go back." "There is no back." The words burst from Clara with unexpected force, her composure cracking. "The agency dismissed me the moment I boarded that stage. My previous employment ended when my employer died. I have $3 to my name and no family waiting anywhere in this world. So please, Mr. Mercer, before you turn away, please just..." She didn't get to finish. Sarah, who'd been quietly watching this exchange with wide blue eyes, suddenly pulled free from Ethan's grasp and darted forward. The child's foot caught on an uneven board, and she went down hard, skinning both knees. The wail that followed was pure, terrified pain. Ethan moved, but Clara was faster. She dropped her carpet bag and swept Sarah into her arms in one fluid motion, sinking to her knees on the platform without thought for her own dress. Her hands were gentle but sure as she examined the scrapes, her voice transforming into something soft and soothing. "Oh, sweetheart, I know it hurts. I know. But you're so brave, aren't you? Let's see. Nothing broken, just some scratches. You're a tough little prairie flower, I can tell." Clara pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve, clean despite her travel, and dabbed carefully at the bleeding knees. "When I was your age, I fell out of an apple tree and scraped both knees and my chin. Want to feel the scar?" Through her tears, Sarah nodded. Clara guided the small hand to a faint mark on her jawline, continuing to speak in that low musical voice. "See? All healed up now, just like yours will be. And you know what my mother told me? She said scars are just proof that we're brave enough to fall down and strong enough to get back up." Sarah's crying had diminished to hiccups. She leaned into Clara's shoulder with the complete trust that children offer so easily, so dangerously. "You're pretty," the little girl murmured. "You smell like flowers." "Lavender soap," Clara said softly, meeting Ethan's eyes over Sarah's head. "It's all I have left of... well, it's not important." Tommy had crept closer during this exchange, his young face serious and assessing. "Did you really fall out of a tree?" "I did. I was trying to get the best apples from the very top branch. Pride goes before a fall, as they say." Clara smiled at the boy, and something in that smile made Ethan's chest ache. It wasn't forced or calculated. It was genuine warmth offered to a child who'd known too little of it lately. "My mama used to make apple pie," Tommy said quietly, "before she died." The platform went very still. Ethan watched Clara's face carefully, waiting for the pity, the awkward condolences, the way people's eyes would slide away from his children when Margaret's death was mentioned. Instead, Clara nodded gravely, treating the boy's words with the seriousness they deserved. "Then she must have been wonderful. Apple pie is the hardest kind to make well. The crust has to be just right." She paused, considering. "I don't make pie as well as your mama surely did, but I can make apple tarts. Would you like to learn how? If your papa says it's all right, of course." She stood, still holding Sarah easily on her hip, and turned to face Ethan directly. Her chin was up now, that initial terror replaced by something quieter, but no less intense. Determination born of desperation. "Mr. Mercer, I know I'm not what you expected. I know I'm too young and probably too inexperienced for what you need, but I'm a hard worker, and I love children, and I promise you I won't be any trouble. I can cook and clean and mend. I can read and write and do sums. I helped raise my younger siblings before they were gone. I have references from my last position, Mrs. Catherine DeWitt of Philadelphia, though she passed 3 months ago." She shifted Sarah to her other hip, the child clinging to her neck with easy affection. "The contract from the agency guarantees 1 month's trial. That's all I'm asking. 30 days to prove I can help your family. If at the end you still want to send me back, I'll go without complaint. I'll even work for just room and board. You can keep the wages for that first month." Ethan stared at her, his mind churning through calculations and concerns. She was too young, too pretty in a way that would cause talk in a town this size, too fragile-looking to handle the brutal work of frontier life. And most dangerous of all, his children were already looking at her with hope lighting their faces, hope he wasn't sure he could afford to nurture. "Papa, she helped Sarah," Tommy said, slipping his hand into Ethan's. "And she knows about apple tarts." "Tommy, this isn't—" Ethan started, but stopped when he looked down at his son. The boy was pleading with his eyes, and behind him Sarah had her thumb in her mouth, something she only did when seeking comfort, while her other hand tangled in Clara's hair. Bill Morrison cleared his throat. "Ethan, I gotta finish my rote. You want this young lady on the return trip or not? Need to know now." The words were right there, ready to emerge. "Yes, put her back on. This isn't what I agreed to. This isn't safe." Because safety meant control, meant knowing exactly what to expect, meant protecting his heart and his children's hearts from any more breaking. But then Clara shifted, and Sarah's head settled onto her shoulder with perfect trust. And Ethan thought about going back to the ranch tonight. Thought about burning another supper while Tommy tried to comfort his crying sister. Thought about the pile of mending that had grown so high he'd started just throwing away torn shirts. Thought about the bone-deep loneliness of being the only adult in a house that echoed with ghosts. 1 month, he heard himself say, and wasn't sure if the words were a salvation or a mistake. 30 days, like the contract says. Room and board, no wages until we see if this arrangement suits. You sleep in the small room off the kitchen, you take your meals with us, and you help with the children in the house. Nothing more. Relief flooded Clara's face so completely that Ethan had to look away from its intensity. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer. You won't regret—" "I already might," he cut her off, more harshly than necessary. "And it's a trial period. Don't go getting settled." He looked at Bill. "Her bag can stay. I'll settle the stage fare with you later." "Already settled," Bill said, giving Ethan a knowing look. "Paid in full to redemption, remember?" Ethan grunted acknowledgement and retrieved Clara's carpet bag from where she'd dropped it. It weighed almost nothing, a woman's entire life reduced to a few pounds of fabric and whatever memories could be folded between garments. The thought disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. "The wagon's this way." He started walking without looking back to see if she followed, Tommy trotting at his side. After a moment he heard Clara's footsteps, lighter than his but steady, Sarah still chattering softly in her arms about the flowers and the pretty lady. And could she really learn to make tarts? The wagon was nothing fancy, a working ranch vehicle with a bench seat and a bed for hauling supplies. Ethan tossed Clara's bag in the back and turned to take Sarah, but his daughter clung tighter to Clara's neck. "Want to ride with Miss Clara, Papa?" "It's just Clara." the young woman said softly. "And you should sit with your father, sweetheart. I'll be right here beside you." But Sarah was insistent with the stubbornness that came with being 4 years old, and Clara finally looked to Ethan for guidance, her eyes uncertain. He nodded curtly and helped them both up onto the bench, then lifted Tommy up to sit between them. He climbed up last, taking the reins with hands that had gentled horses and mended broken fences and buried a wife, but suddenly felt clumsy with the weight of a stranger's presence. The ride back to the ranch was 7 miles of rutted road through prairie grass that stretched to touch the sky. September was painting the landscape in golds and ambers, the Bighorn Mountains rising in purple shadows to the west. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, beauty that could kill you if you didn't respect it. Clara was quiet at first, her arms still wrapped around Sarah, but Ethan could feel her attention taking in everything. The cattle grazing in the distance, the clusters of cottonwoods marking where water could be found, the endless sky that swallowed newcomers whole. "It's so open," she finally said, and he couldn't tell if it was wonder or fear in her voice. "That bother you?" No. She paused. "In Philadelphia, you could go days without seeing the sky properly. Buildings crowded it out. It's vast." "Vast can be lonely," Ethan said before he could stop himself, "especially for someone used to city life. There's no neighbors for 3 miles, no town closer than what you just saw. Winter here can bury you in silence." He meant it as a warning, perhaps even hoping she'd reconsider before they got all the way to the ranch. Instead, Clara nodded slowly, her hand stroking Sarah's hair with an absent gentleness. "I've learned that loneliness isn't about how many people surround you, Mr. Mercer. Some of the loneliest moments of my life were in crowded rooms." She met his eyes briefly, and some of the fullest were in silence. There was a story there, Ethan realized, pain that matched the shadows in her green eyes. But he didn't ask, wouldn't ask, because asking meant caring, and caring meant vulnerability he couldn't afford. Tommy, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly piped up. "Are you scared of cows?" Clara smiled. "I've never been close enough to one to know. Should I be?" "They're mostly nice if you don't spook them," Tommy said, with the seriousness of a boy sharing crucial information. "Papa says you gotta respect them but not fear them. Same with horses." "That sounds like good advice for many things in life," Clara replied. "I'll remember that." The ranch came into view over the next rise, a modest spread by Wyoming standards. The main house was sturdy but weather-worn, 2 stories of timber that had stood against 15 winters. The barn needed a new coat of paint, and the fencing showed signs of quick repairs rather than proper maintenance. There was a chicken coop, a root cellar, a smokehouse, and beyond it all, the grassland where Ethan's small herd grazed. It wasn't much. It wasn't the prosperous ranch Ethan had imagined building with Margaret, but it was home, and it was his, and it was one more mortgage payment away from being lost forever. Clara's sharp intake of breath made him glance over. She was staring at the house with an expression he couldn't quite read, not disappointment, but something else. Hunger, perhaps. The look of someone seeing haven after a long journey through hostile territory. "It needs work," Ethan said defensively. "I've been managing alone and there's only so many hours in a day." "It's beautiful," Clara said simply. "It looks like a home where people are loved." The words hit Ethan like a fist to the chest. Loved. Past tense now, though the evidence remained. The swing he'd built for Sarah hanging from the cottonwood. The small garden plot Margaret had insisted on despite the harsh soil, the rocking chair visible on the porch where she'd nursed both babies under the stars. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down without responding, reaching up to take Sarah. This time the child went to him willingly, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "Is the pretty lady staying, Papa? Is she our new mama?" "No." The word came out too hard, and he softened it. "She's here to help for a while, that's all. Don't—" He struggled for the right words, looking down at his daughter's hopeful face. "Don't go naming things that aren't decided yet, sweetheart." He set Sarah down and turned to help Clara from the wagon, his hand spanning her waist briefly as she stepped down. She was lighter than he'd expected, almost fragile under the layers of travel-worn clothing. Up close, He could see the shadows under her eyes, the weariness that went deeper than a few days of stagecoach travel. This was a woman who'd been running on hope and determination for far longer than was sustainable. "Tommy, take your sister inside and wash up," Ethan instructed. "Clara, Miss Hale, I'll show you where you'll be staying." "Just Clara is fine," she said quietly, following him up the porch steps. I don't need formality, Mr. Mercer." "Then it's Ethan. We don't stand on ceremony out here much." He opened the front door, and the familiar smell of home hit him. Wood smoke and leather, and the faint ghost of Margaret's lavender sachets that still lingered in unexpected corners. The front room was tidy enough by bachelor standards. Furniture that had been carefully chosen now showed the wear of children and grief. Cushions permanently dented, a table with water rings that wouldn't buff out, curtains that needed mending. Through the doorway, the kitchen was visible, and beyond that, the small room where Clara would sleep. But Clara had stopped in the center of the front room, turning in a slow circle. Her eyes cataloged everything. The photographs on the mantel, including one of Margaret in her wedding dress, the children's toys clustered in a corner, the bookshelf with its mix of practical manuals and a few treasured novels, the piano against one wall that hadn't been played since Margaret's hands had last touched the keys. "Your wife was beautiful," Clara said softly, nodding toward the photograph. "The children have her eyes." Ethan's throat tightened. "Yes, they do." He moved toward the kitchen, needing to escape the observation. "Your room is through here." The small room off the kitchen had been Margaret's sewing room, though Ethan had cleared out most of her things months ago, unable to bear looking at them. A narrow bed, a washstand, a small chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the eastern prairie. Simple and spare. Clara set her carpet bag on the bed and ran her hand over the quilt. One of Margaret's creations, a pattern of stars that had taken her 2 winters to complete. "It's perfect. Thank you." "Supper's at 6. I usually just make something simple. Beans, salt pork, bread when there's time to bake." Ethan stood awkwardly in the doorway. "You don't have to start working tonight. You've traveled far. Rest if you need to." "I'd like to make supper, if that's all right." Clara turned to face him, her hands clasped in front of her. "I'd like to start as I mean to continue, and I'd like to be useful, Mr. Mercer." "Ethan, I need to be useful." There was something desperate in that admission, as if being useful was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. Ethan recognized it because he'd felt it himself in those first awful months after Margaret's death. The need to work until exhaustion claimed him, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant drowning. "All right then. Kitchen's yours. There's a chicken needs dressing if you're up for it, and root vegetables in the cellar, flour and such in the pantry." He paused. "The children like their food plain. Nothing too fancy." "I understand." Clara moved past him into the kitchen, and he caught that scent of lavender again, incongruous in this rough setting. She began examining the space with the efficiency of someone trained to adapt quickly, finding where things were stored, assessing what she had to work with. Ethan should have left then, should have gone to check on the children or start on the evening chores. Instead, he found himself lingering, watching as Clara rolled up her sleeves and tied on an apron she found hanging by the stove. Her movements were practiced, confident in this domain in a way she hadn't been on the platform. "You've done this before," he observed, "cooking for a household." "I was in service for 3 years before Mrs. DeWitt took me as her companion, and before that—" She trailed off, focusing on pumping water into a basin. "I learned young to make much from little." Service. So she'd been a servant, not a governess or teacher as Eleanor Whitfield had been. The agency had sent him someone from an entirely different class, with entirely different credentials. He should have been angrier about the deception, but watching her work with quiet capability, he found his irritation fading into something more complicated. "The children, they've had it rough," Ethan heard himself say. "Tommy was barely 4 when Margaret died, and Sarah doesn't remember her much at all, though she won't admit it. They've been starved for a woman's touch, and they're liable to—" He struggled for the words. "They're liable to get attached quickly, too quickly." Clara stilled, her hands resting on the edge of the basin. When she looked at him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. And you're afraid that in 30 days I'll leave and break their hearts. Yes. The admission cost him, but it was the truth. I can't protect them from much in this life, but I can try to protect them from that. I understand. Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. I'll be careful. I'll keep my distance. But even as she said it, Ethan heard Sarah's laughter from the other room where Tommy was telling her some story, and he knew it was already too late for distance. His children were desperately hungry for softness in a world that had offered them little but hardness. Claire Hale could be as careful as she liked, but love, or the child's version of it, didn't respect boundaries. And maybe that was what frightened him most of all. I'll be in the barn if you need anything, he said roughly, retreating before the moment could stretch any thinner. Supper at 6. He left her there in Margaret's kitchen, a stranger wearing his dead wife's apron, and tried not to think about how right it looked, how easily she'd slipped into the space that had been empty for so long. Outside, the September air was cooling toward evening. Ethan stood on the porch for a moment, hands gripped on the railing, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions in his chest. He'd meant to send her back. Every logical part of his brain had been screaming that she was wrong, too young, too unknown, too dangerous to the fragile equilibrium he'd built. But then Sarah had fallen, and Clara had moved without thinking, and in that moment, Ethan had seen something that terrified and tempted him in equal measure, the possibility of healing, not replacement, because Margaret could never be replaced, but healing, the slow knitting together of a family that had been torn apart. 1 month, he'd said. 30 days to see if it could work. 30 days to see if his heart could survive the risk. Inside the house, through the window, he could see Clara moving through the kitchen with growing confidence. She'd found the chicken and was making short work of preparing it, her movements efficient but not rushed. And drifting through the open door came her voice, soft and melodic, singing something he didn't recognize. A lullaby, perhaps, or just a tune to fill the silence. Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway, watching her with solemn curiosity. Clara said something that made the boy smile. Actually smile, something Ethan hadn't seen enough of lately. Then Sarah toddled in, and Clara swept her up onto a chair at the table, found her a scrap of dough to play with while she worked. It looked like a family. It looked like home. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Ethan turned away and headed for the barn, where the work was simple and the emotions were confined to whether the fence would hold and if the cattle were healthy. Out here, he knew the rules. Out here, everything made sense. But when the dinner bell rang at 6 o'clock, Margaret's old bell that Ethan hadn't heard in months because he'd stopped bothering with such niceties, he found himself hurrying back to the house despite his better judgment. The kitchen table was set properly for the first time since Margaret's death. Real napkins, plates that matched, cups set just so. The chicken was roasted golden brown, surrounded by vegetables that actually looked appealing. Fresh bread steamed in a basket, and there was even a small pot of butter that Clara must have found in the coldest corner of the root cellar. "Papa, look!" Sarah bounced in her chair. "Miss Clara made a feast." "It's just supper," Clara said quickly, as if afraid she'd overstepped. "I hope it's all right." "I found most things in the pantry and cellar. If I've used anything I shouldn't have, it's fine." Ethan took his seat at the head of the table, uncomfortable with the formality of it all. "You didn't have to go to this trouble." "It wasn't trouble." Clara served the children first, cutting Sarah's chicken into small pieces without being asked, giving Tommy slightly larger portions with a conspiratorial smile. "I enjoy cooking. It's one of the few things I'm truly good at." They ate in a silence that gradually became less awkward. The food was excellent, better than anything Ethan had managed in the past year and a half. The chicken was tender, seasoned with herbs that must have come from Margaret's dried collection. The bread was fresh and soft, the vegetables cooked just right. "This is really good," Tommy ventured, looking between Clara and his father as if seeking permission to acknowledge it. "Thank you, Tommy. That's kind of you to say." Clara smiled at the boy, and Ethan noticed she'd barely touched her own food, focused instead on making sure the children had what they needed. "You should eat," he said gruffly. "No point in cooking if you don't enjoy it yourself." Clara picked up her fork obediently, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was trying so hard to do everything perfectly. She was afraid, he realized, afraid of making a mistake, afraid of being sent away, afraid of... Tell us about Philadelphia, Ethan said suddenly, surprising himself. The children have never been to a big city. They'd probably like to hear about it. Clara's eyes widened slightly, then softened. Philadelphia is very different from here. The buildings are so tall they block out the sun in some streets, and there are so many people, thousands and thousands of them, all crowded together. The noise never really stops, even at night. Did you like it there? Tommy asked around a mouthful of bread. Parts of it. I like the libraries and the parks. There's a beautiful park called Rittenhouse Square where families would go on Sunday afternoons, but... She paused, choosing her words carefully. But I always felt like I was looking at life through a window rather than living it myself. Does that make sense? Sarah shook her head no, but Tommy nodded thoughtfully. Mama used to say she felt like that sometimes in town, the boy said quietly. She said she only felt real out here, where the sky was big. The mention of Margaret hung in the air. Clara didn't flinch away from it. Your mother sounds like she was very wise and very brave to make a life in a place this wild. She was, Ethan said, his voice rough with old grief. She was both those things. After supper, Clara insisted on cleaning up while Ethan got the children ready for bed. It was a routine that had become his alone, the washing of faces, the brushing of teeth, the changing into night clothes, while Tommy protested he was too old for help, and Sarah insisted she wasn't tired even as her eyes drooped. But tonight, Clara appeared in the doorway of the children's room just as Ethan was trying to manage Sarah's tangled hair with a brush, making the child yelp with each stroke. May I? Clara held out her hand for the brush. Ethan surrendered it gratefully, watching as Clara knelt beside the bed and began working through the tangles with a patience and skill he didn't possess. She started at the bottom, working her way up in small sections, talking softly to distract Sarah from any discomfort. You have such beautiful hair, like spun gold. My little sister had hair just like this. I used to braid it every morning before school. Her hands moved with practiced ease. Would you like braids tomorrow? I could teach you a special pattern. Yes, please, Sarah said dreamily, already half asleep under the gentle ministrations. Tommy watched from his bed, his young face unreadable. Finally he spoke. Did you really have a sister? 2 sisters and a brother, Clara said softly, finishing Sarah's hair and tucking the child under her quilts. All younger than me. Where are they now? The question hung heavy in the air. Clara was quiet for a long moment, her hand stilling on Sarah's blanket. Gone. All of them. Scarlet fever 5 years ago. My parents, too. The stark simplicity of it, the absolute finality, made Ethan's chest ache. He'd known she'd mentioned raising siblings, but he hadn't understood the depth of loss she carried. I'm sorry, Tommy said with the grave sincerity of a child who understood death too well. That must have hurt real bad. It did. It still does sometimes. Clara looked up at the boy. But talking about them, remembering the good times, that helps. Would you like to tell me about your mother sometime, when you're ready? Tommy considered this, then nodded slowly. Maybe. Not tonight, though. Whenever you're ready, or never, if you prefer. Either way is all right. Clara stood, smoothing her skirts. Good night, Tommy. Good night, Sarah. Night, Miss Clara, Sarah mumbled, already drifting off. Clara moved past Ethan in the doorway, and he caught her arm gently. Thank you, he said quietly, for being gentle with them. They're easy to be gentle with. They're wonderful children, Ethan. You've done well with them. The praise shouldn't have mattered so much, but it did. Ethan released her arm and stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the narrow hallway, how the lamplight caught the copper in her hair. I should check on the animals one more time before bed, he said, retreating. Make yourself at home. There's water in the kitchen if you need it. He fled to the barn like a coward, spending far longer than necessary checking on horses and cattle that were perfectly fine. When he finally returned to the house, the lamps were dimmed and Clara's door was closed. A thin line of light showed beneath it. She was still awake, probably unpacking her meager belongings, or perhaps writing letters to... who? She'd said she had no family, no one waiting for her. The thought of her alone in that small room surrounded by the ghosts of his dead wife's things, should have troubled him. Instead, what troubled him was how easy it had been to have her there, how naturally she'd fit into the rhythms of his household, how right it had felt to have another adult voice in the house, someone to share the weight of the day's end. 30 days, he reminded himself as he lay in his own bed, staring at the ceiling. 30 days to see if this could work, and then he'd decide. But deep in his heart, in a place he wasn't ready to acknowledge, Ethan Mercer suspected the decision was already being made. One gentle moment, one family supper, one act of kindness at a time, and that terrified him more than all the harsh winters and failing cattle and mortgage payments combined. Because losing someone you needed was hard, but losing someone you'd started to love, that could destroy you. The first week passed in a rhythm that felt both strange and inevitable, like a river finding its course through new territory. Clara rose before dawn each morning, moving through the kitchen with quiet efficiency while the household still slept. Ethan would wake to the smell of coffee already brewing, biscuits in the oven, and the soft sounds of someone who knew how to make a house feel lived in again. He'd lie there for those first few moments, caught between comfort and guilt, because it felt too much like before, like when Margaret's presence had filled these rooms with warmth. But it wasn't the same. Clara moved differently, spoke differently. Even the sound of her footsteps on the floorboards was lighter, more hesitant, as if she were still asking permission to exist in this space. "You don't have to get up this early," Ethan told her on the third morning, finding her already dressed and working on breakfast when he came downstairs. "I can manage coffee and something simple." Clara looked up from the stove, a smudge of flour on her cheek. "I don't mind. I've never been good at sleeping late, and I like the quiet of mornings. It gives me time to think." She paused, her hand stilling. "But if you'd prefer to have this time alone, I can—" "No." The word came out faster than he'd intended. "No, it's fine. Good, even. The coffee's better than what I make." A small smile touched her lips, there and gone like a bird landing briefly before taking flight again. "I'll take that as high praise from a Wyoming rancher." They fell into an unspoken routine. Ethan would drink his coffee standing by the window, looking out over the land as the sun crept above the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Clara would work at the stove, occasionally asking quiet questions about how he liked things prepared, what the children preferred, whether he minded if she reorganized the pantry to make more sense. He never minded. Truth was, he was grateful for someone who cared enough to ask. The children bloomed under Clara's attention like drought-starved flowers after rain. Sarah followed her everywhere, a small shadow in braids that Clara wove fresh each morning in patterns that grew increasingly elaborate. Tommy was more cautious, watching Clara with the serious assessment of a boy who'd learned not to trust too easily, but even he began to soften. It was the small things that undid the boy's resistance. The way Clara asked his opinion about which vegetables to plant in the spring garden, treating his answers with genuine consideration. How she'd sit with him while he struggled through his reading lessons, never making him feel stupid when he stumbled over words, instead offering patient encouragement. The afternoon she spent an hour helping him build a better trap for the gophers that plagued the barn, her skirts hiked up practically as she knelt in the dirt beside him, discussing engineering principles as if he were a fellow adult. "She's real smart, Papa," Tommy confided one evening as Ethan tucked him in. "She knows about stars and how plants grow and why the wind changes direction. Almost as smart as Mama was." The comparison should have stung, but instead it settled into Ethan's chest with a bittersweet ache. Your mama would have liked that. She always wanted you to have someone to answer your questions. "Do you like Miss Clara?" Tommy's eyes were too knowing for a 6-year-old. "I mean, do you think she can stay after the month is done?" Ethan smoothed his son's hair back, buying time. "We'll see how it goes, son. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." But he was getting ahead of himself. That was the problem. He'd catch himself watching Clara when she didn't know, the way she hummed while kneading bread, the tenderness with which she mended Sarah's torn dress, the quiet competence she brought to every task. She'd transformed the house in ways both visible and not. The windows sparkled, the floors gleamed, curtains that had hung dingy for months were washed and bright again. But more than that, there was life in these rooms. Laughter. The sound of Sarah singing songs Clara had taught her, the smell of fresh bread and simmering stew and possibility. By the second week, the children had stopped calling her Miss Clara, except when Ethan was in earshot. He'd heard Sarah slip and call her Mama once, then quickly correct herself with a guilty glance his direction. Clara had handled it gracefully, kneeling to the child's level. I know you miss your mama, sweetheart. That's good and right. Love doesn't run out just because someone's gone. It stays with us. I'm not here to be your mama. I'm just here to take care of you and love you while I can. Is that all right? Sarah had nodded, throwing her arms around Clara's neck, and Ethan had turned away before they could see the emotion in his eyes. The town noticed the changes too. Mrs. Abernathy from the general store made pointed comments when Ethan came in for supplies, Clara waiting in the wagon with the children. Awful young, isn't she? The older woman said, her eyes sharp with speculation. Not what you advertised for, I heard. She's capable and good with the children, Ethan replied evenly, refusing to be baited. That's what matters. Just seems to me a pretty young thing like that, living out at your ranch with no chaperone. Well, people talk, Ethan Mercer. You know they do. Let them talk. He gathered his purchases and tipped his hat. Good day, Mrs. Abernathy. But the encounter left him uneasy. He hadn't considered how it would look to others. A widower with a young woman living under his roof. In the city, perhaps it wouldn't have mattered, but out here where everyone knew everyone's business and reputations could be destroyed by whispers. That evening, after the children were asleep, he found Clara in the kitchen finishing the last of the dishes. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from trying too hard, caring too much. You should sit down, he said. You've been going since before dawn. I'm almost done. She dried the last plate and set it carefully in the cupboard, then turned to face him. Was there something you needed? Yes, he thought. I need to know why you're here. I need to know what you're running from. I need to know if I can trust this fragile peace we've built. Instead, he said, we need to talk about the arrangement, about expectations. Something flickered in her eyes. Fear, he thought, or maybe resignation. She nodded and moved to the table, sitting with her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl awaiting judgment. Ethan took the seat across from her, suddenly aware of how small the kitchen felt with just the two of them, the lamp casting shadows that made the moment feel more intimate than he'd intended. You've done good work here, he started. Better than I expected. The children are happy, the house runs smoother than it has in a long time. But, Clara's voice was quiet, braced for the blow. But people in town are starting to talk about you being here, about what it looks like. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I should have thought about that before I let you stay. Your reputation, I have no reputation to protect. The words were flat, final. No family to be shamed, no social standing to maintain. If people want to talk, let them. It doesn't matter to me. It should matter. A young woman's reputation is nothing without the woman herself. Clara leaned forward, and in the lamplight, her eyes blazed with something fierce and unexpected. I've learned that the hard way, Mr. Mercer. Ethan, I've been proper and respectable and done everything right, and where did it get me? Alone with nothing, sent west like unwanted freight. She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. If staying here means people talk, so be it. I'd rather have purpose and gossip than propriety and starvation. The vehemence in her words told him there was a deeper story there, wounds that hadn't healed. Ethan studied her profile in the window's reflection, the set of her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the windowsill. What happened to you? He asked quietly. In Philadelphia, before this. What are you running from? For a long moment she didn't answer. Then, so softly he almost missed it. I'm not running from something. I'm running toward this possibility of something different, something real. She turned to face him, and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, though she held them back through sheer will. Mrs. DeWitt was kind to me. She took me in when the family I served dismissed me after. She paused, swallowing hard. After the son of the house decided I was fair game for his attentions. They blamed me, of course. It's always the girl's fault. Anger rose sharp and sudden in Ethan's chest. Did he? No, I fought him off, and the resulting scene was loud enough that his mother heard, but I was still the one turned out. Clara's laugh was bitter. Mrs. DeWitt gave me refuge, companionship, even genuine affection. But when she died, her nephew inherited everything and made it clear my services were no longer needed. I had 3 days to vacate. And the agency? Was my only option. They said they had a placement, a widower with children who needed a mature, experienced woman to manage his household. Eleanor Whitfield seemed perfect for it. Clara's voice dropped. But Mrs. Whitfield took ill, and the agency had already spent your money, and I was desperate enough to accept when they offered me the position instead. They told me not to mention the switch. They said you'd accept me once you saw I could do the work. They lied to both of us then. Yes. She met his eyes directly. I'm sorry I was party to that deception, even unknowingly. If you want me to leave because of it, I'll understand. But please believe me when I say I came here with honest intentions. I just wanted a chance, a place to belong. The rawness of that last admission hung between them. Ethan thought about his own loneliness, his own desperate need for help that had driven him to advertise for a stranger. They'd both been deceived, but they'd also both been desperate. Maybe that made them even. I don't want you to leave, he heard himself say. Not unless you want to. But we need to be clear about what this is. You're the housekeeper and caretaker for the children, nothing more. That's what I'll tell anyone who asks, and that's the truth of it. Of course. Clara nodded quickly. I would never presume. And after the 30 days, if this arrangement suits us both, we'll discuss terms, proper wages, a formal contract, something that protects you as well as me. Surprise softened her features. You do that? Even with people talking? Let them talk. Like you said, reputation means nothing if we're doing right by each other and the children. He stood, suddenly needing distance from the intensity of the moment. It's late. You should get some rest. Ethan? She stopped him at the doorway. Thank you for listening, for not judging. We've all got our stories, Clara, all got our scars. He paused, his hand on the doorframe. For what it's worth, that family that dismissed you. They were fools. Any man who'd force himself on a woman in his employ isn't fit to be called a man, and any family that would blame you for defending yourself doesn't deserve your service. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over, silent tracks down her cheeks. I've never told anyone that before. Not the whole truth of it. Then I'm honored you trusted me with it. He nodded goodnight and left before the moment could unspool any further, before he could do something foolish like offer comfort that would blur the careful lines he'd just drawn. But that night, lying in bed, Ethan found himself thinking not about Margaret for the first time in months, but about a young woman with green eyes and copper hair who'd been dealt cruelty and responded with gentleness, who'd lost everything and still found ways to give, who made his children laugh and his house feel like a home again. Dangerous thoughts for a man who'd sworn never to risk his heart again. The third week brought the first real test of their arrangement. Sarah woke in the night with a fever, her small body burning with heat, her cries bringing both Ethan and Clara running. They met in the hallway outside the children's room, Clara in her nightgown with a shawl thrown over her shoulders, Ethan in hastily pulled-on trousers and an unbuttoned shirt. It's Sarah, Clara said unnecessarily, already moving into the room. She's burning up. The sight of his daughter's flushed face, the sound of her labored breathing, sent ice through Ethan's veins. This was how it had started with Margaret, the fever, the cough, the terrible swift decline. I'll ride for the doctor, he said, already turning. Ethan, wait. Clara's hand on his arm stopped him. It's a 3-hour ride to town and back in the dark. She needs care now. Her voice was calm, steady, when his was threatening to fracture. I've nursed fever before. Let me try to bring it down while you wake Tommy and keep him calm. If she's not better by dawn, then you ride for the doctor. Every instinct screamed to leave immediately, to fetch help, to do something. But Clara was right. Riding in the dark over rough terrain would take hours, and what could the doctor do that they couldn't? Margaret had had the doctor, and it hadn't saved her. Tell me what you need, he managed. Cool water, clean cloths, and willow bark if you have it, and pray she's strong enough to fight this. They worked through the night in tense coordination. Clara sponged Sarah's burning skin with cool water, speaking softly to the child when she cried out in her fever dreams. Ethan held his daughter when the chills came, wrapping her in blankets while her small body shook, helpless against the terror of watching another person he loved suffer. Tommy woke sometime after midnight and stood in the doorway, his face pale with remembered fear. "Is Sarah going to die like Mama did?" "No," Clara answered before Ethan could speak, her voice fierce with certainty she probably didn't feel. "No, Tommy, this is just a fever. Children get them and recover all the time. Your sister is strong, and we're taking good care of her. Can I help?" "Yes." Clara gestured him over. "You can hold her hand and tell her stories. Sick people need to hear familiar voices, to know they're not alone. Can you do that?" Tommy climbed onto the bed and took his sister's hand, his young voice trembling as he began recounting the story of the three bears. Clara caught Ethan's eye over the children's heads, and in that look was understanding, shared fear, and something else, a kind of partnership forged in crisis. By dawn, Sarah's fever had broken. She slept peacefully for the first time in hours, her breathing even and unlabored. Tommy had fallen asleep beside her, still holding her hand. Clara sat in the rocking chair by the window, her head tipped back against the wood, eyes closed in exhaustion. Ethan stood in the doorway watching them, this tableau of his fractured family held together by a woman who'd been a stranger 3 weeks ago. His chest ached with emotions he couldn't name, gratitude tangled with fear, tangled with something dangerously close to affection. "Clara," he spoke softly, not wanting to wake the children. "You should rest." Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on him. "Is she all right?" "Thanks to you." He moved into the room, crouching beside the rocking chair. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here, if I'd been alone with this." "You would have managed. You're stronger than you think." She smiled faintly. "But I'm glad I could help. That's why I'm here, after all." "Is it?" The question came out before he could stop it. "Is that the only reason?" Something shifted in her eyes, a vulnerability that made his breath catch. "I don't know anymore. It started that way, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else." The admission hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to name. "These past 3 weeks have been the happiest I've known in years, Ethan. Even with the work, even with the uncertainty, I feel like I matter here, like I'm part of something." "You are." His hand found hers where it rested on the arm of the chair, his roughened fingers closing over her slender ones. "You matter to the children, to this household, to—" He couldn't finish. Couldn't give voice to the truth that was becoming harder to deny with each passing day, that she mattered to him as well, that the careful distance he'd tried to maintain was crumbling like creek banks in spring flood, that when she'd appeared in the hallway tonight in her nightgown with her hair loose around her shoulders, his first thought hadn't been propriety but relief that he wouldn't have to face this alone. Clara turned her hand in his, her palm pressing against his palm. "The month is almost up. We need to talk about what comes next." "I know." Ethan stood abruptly, breaking the contact before it could lead somewhere dangerous. "But not now. Not when we're both exhausted and emotional. We'll talk in a few days when Sarah's fully recovered and we can think clearly." It was a coward's retreat, and they both knew it. But Clara nodded, letting him escape without pressing the issue. "All right, a few days." Sarah recovered quickly, as children often do, bouncing back with the resilience of youth. Within 2 days, she was demanding to be let outside, complaining that Claire was being too cautious when she insisted on one more day of rest. "You're a tyrant," Ethan told Clara with amusement as Sarah pouted from her bed, surrounded by toys and books meant to keep her entertained. "I'm practical. Fevers can relapse if you push too hard too soon." But she smiled as she said it, ruffling Sarah's hair. "One more day, sweetheart, then you can run wild again." "Will you make cookies if I'm good?" Sarah tried to negotiate. "Probably even if you're not good," Clara laughed. "But don't tell your father I'm such a soft touch." "I already know." Ethan caught Clara's eye, and something warm passed between them, the easy affection of two people learning to work in tandem, to anticipate each other's needs and rhythms. It was Tommy who finally forced the conversation they'd been avoiding. The fourth week dawned with September sliding toward October, the aspens beginning their transformation to gold, the air carrying the first hints of the winter to come. At breakfast, the boy pushed his eggs around his plate, his face troubled. "Tommy?" Clara noticed immediately. "What's wrong? Are you feeling ill?" "No." He set down his fork with exaggerated care. "I'm fine. I need to ask Papa something." Ethan lowered his coffee cup, suddenly alert to his son's serious tone. "All right, ask." "The month is almost done. Almost 30 days. Tommy looked between his father and Clara, his young face far too solemn. "Is Miss Clara leaving? Because if she is, I need to know. I need to prepare." The word broke Ethan's heart. Prepare. As if losing people was something a 6-year-old should have to steel himself against. "Tommy," he started, but Clara interrupted. "That's not up to me, sweetheart. That's your father's decision." "Then, Papa, please." Tommy's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Please let her stay. I know you said not to get attached, but I am attached. We both are." He gestured to Sarah. "She makes things better. She makes it feel like we're a real family again." The silence that followed was heavy with everything unsaid. Ethan looked at his son's pleading face, then at Sarah, who'd stopped eating to watch with wide, hopeful eyes. Finally, his gaze landed on Clara, who sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression carefully neutral, though he could see the tension in her shoulders, the rapid pulse at her throat. "Clara," he said quietly, "could we speak privately? Children, finish your breakfast." He stood and walked out to the porch, hearing Clara follow moments later. The morning was cool, the sun just beginning to burn off the mist that lay in the low places. His land stretched out before him, the pastures, the creek line marked by cottonwoods, the mountains beyond painted in morning light. "I'm sorry," Clara said behind him. "I tried to keep them from getting too attached, but it's not your fault." Ethan turned to face her. "I'm the one who let this go on, who let myself pretend we could keep this temporary when everything about it feels permanent." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want you to stay. Not for 30 days, not for a trial period, but for as long as you want to be here." The words came easier than he'd expected. "The children need you. The household runs better with you. And you?" She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "I've gotten used to having you here, to morning coffee and someone to talk to at day's end, to not being alone with all of it." He struggled for honesty. "I can't offer you what I offered Margaret. I can't promise that my heart isn't too damaged to love again properly, but I can offer you a home, fair wages, respect, and a place in this family." Clara's eyes glistened with tears. "That's more than I ever hoped for, more than I deserve." "That's not true." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that felt both familiar and terrifying. "You deserve so much more than what life's given you. But if you'll settle for this, for us, I'll do my best to make sure you never regret it." "I won't regret it." She caught his hand as he withdrew it, holding it between both of hers. "I promise you that, Ethan. This is exactly where I want to be." They stood there on the porch as the sun climbed higher, hands clasped, an understanding passing between them that was more than employer and employee, not quite husband and wife, but something in between, a partnership forged from shared need and growing affection. "We should tell the children," Clara said finally. "Yes." But neither of them moved, caught in the moment's fragile peace. Inside, Tommy and Sarah waited with barely contained anxiety. When Ethan and Clara returned to the kitchen, the children's faces were studies in hope and dread. "Miss Clara is staying," Ethan announced simply. "Permanently, if she wants." The joy that erupted was pure and unrestrained. Sarah shrieked and launched herself at Clara, who caught her with a laugh. Tommy's smile split his face wide open, years of worry momentarily erased. "Really? Forever and ever?" Sarah demanded. "For as long as forever lasts," Clara confirmed, pressing kisses to the girl's hair. Tommy approached more slowly, stopping in front of his father. "Are you happy about it too, Papa? Not just doing it for us?" The question was too perceptive, too knowing. Ethan knelt to his son's level. "I'm happy about it. Miss Clara, she's made things better for all of us, including me." "Good." Tommy threw his arms around Ethan's neck in a rare display of affection. "I was scared you'd send her away because you're still sad about Mama." "I'll always miss your Mama," Ethan said carefully. "But being sad doesn't mean we can't also be happy. Your Mama would want us to be happy, to have help and laughter in this house. She'd like Miss Clara." "I think so too," Tommy agreed seriously. "She makes you smile more." "Did she?" Ethan hadn't noticed, but perhaps it was true. Perhaps the weight he'd carried for so long had lightened incrementally, one small kindness at a time, until he could breathe easier. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Ethan found Clara on the porch again, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill, staring up at the stars. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, joining her. "Too much running through my mind." She glanced at him. "I keep waiting to wake up and find this was all a dream, that I'm still in Philadelphia with nowhere to go and no future." "It's real." He leaned against the railing beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "You're here, and you're staying, and tomorrow you'll wake up in that small room off the kitchen to make coffee before dawn." She laughed softly. "When you put it like that, it sounds terribly ordinary. Maybe that's what makes it extraordinary. The ordinary moments, the daily rhythms. I spent so long just surviving, I forgot what it was like to actually live." He paused. "You reminded me." "You gave me a reason to live again," Clara countered. "Fair trade, I'd say." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, the prairie settling into its nighttime sounds around them. Somewhere an owl called. The horses nickered softly in the barn. The wind moved through the grass with a whisper, like secrets being shared. "Clara?" Ethan's voice was quiet. "What do you want? Not what you think I want to hear, not what's proper or expected. What do you actually want from this life?" She considered the question seriously. "I want to matter. I want to wake up each day knowing my presence makes a difference to someone. I want to belong somewhere so completely that leaving would tear me apart." She turned to look at him directly. "I want what I'm starting to have here, purpose, connection, maybe even love someday, though I know that's not what you're offering." "Not yet," he heard himself say, "but maybe someday, if my heart remembers how." Her smile was soft in the starlight. "I can wait for someday, Ethan Mercer. I'm good at waiting." They went inside together, parting at their separate doors with quiet goodnights. But something had shifted between them. The careful distance was narrowing. The walls were coming down brick by brick. And in her small room off the kitchen, Clara lay awake counting her blessings instead of her losses for the first time in years. While in his room down the hall, Ethan stared at Margaret's photograph and whispered a silent apology that felt more like permission. Permission to heal, to hope, to perhaps, eventually, love again. The month had ended, but something new was beginning, something neither of them had planned for but both desperately needed. A temporary arrangement had become a permanent home, and that was more terrifying and wonderful than either of them had dared to imagine. October arrived with a vengeance, bringing cold rain that turned the roads to mud and kept them close to the ranch for days at a time. Clara didn't seem to mind the isolation. If anything, she thrived in it, turning the enforced togetherness into opportunities for small domestic pleasures, teaching Sarah to knead bread, helping Tommy with his letters by the fire, mending Ethan's shirts with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. The rhythm they'd found in September deepened into something more substantial. Ethan caught himself anticipating Clara's reactions to things, storing up small observations from his day to share with her over evening coffee. The way she'd tilt her head when listening, really listening, as if his thoughts about cattle prices or fence repairs mattered as much as philosophy. How she'd bite her lower lip when concentrating on a difficult repair, her fingers working with patient precision. The soft humming that meant she was content, a tuneless melody that had become the soundtrack to his household. But contentment, Ethan had learned the hard way, was a fragile thing. And on a gray afternoon in mid-October, that fragility shattered. The knock on the door came just after lunch, unexpected enough that all of them looked up from the table. Visitors were rare this time of year, rarer still in weather like this. Ethan wiped his mouth and stood, exchanging a glance with Clara that held a question neither could answer. The man on the porch was a stranger, middle-aged, well-dressed despite the mud splattered on his coat, with the officious air of someone accustomed to authority. He held a leather satchel protected under his arm and regarded Ethan with the cool assessment of a banker calculating risk. "Mr. Ethan Mercer?" His voice was clipped, Eastern, out of place in this rough country. "That's right. What can I do for you?" "My name is Howard Pemberton. I'm a registry agent for the Western Matrimonial Agency." He pulled a document from his satchel. "I'm here to conduct a follow-up inspection regarding the placement of Miss Clara Hale." Every muscle in Ethan's body tensed. "Inspection? Standard procedure for all placements, I assure you. The agency takes its reputation seriously. We need to verify that the arrangement is satisfactory for both parties and that Miss Hale is being treated according to the terms of the contract." Pemberton's eyes moved past Ethan into the house, cataloging details. "May I come in? This won't take long." Ethan wanted to refuse, to send this man back into the rain and away from the life they'd built. But refusing would raise questions, might even put Clara's position at risk if the agency deemed him uncooperative. He stepped back reluctantly, allowing Pemberton inside. Clara had risen from the table, her face gone pale at the sight of the stranger. The children clung to her skirts, sensing the tension that had suddenly filled the room. "Miss Hale," Pemberton inclined his head with cool courtesy. "I trust you're well?" "Yes, sir." Her voice was steady, but Ethan heard the tremor underneath. "Quite well, thank you." "Excellent. Then you won't mind answering a few questions." Pemberton set his satchel on the table, pulling out papers and a pen. "Mr. Mercer, if you could give us a moment of privacy." "No." The word came out harder than Ethan intended. "Anything you need to ask Clara, you can ask with me present. This is my home, and she's under my protection." Something flickered in Pemberton's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. "Very well. Miss Hale, are your accommodations adequate?" "Yes, sir. Very much so." "And your duties? Are they as outlined in the contract?" "Yes." Clara's hands twisted together. "I care for the household and the children. Mr. Mercer has been nothing but proper and respectful." Pemberton made notes, his pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. "I see. And the compensation?" "Fair and timely," Clara said before Ethan could speak. "I have no complaints whatsoever." More scratching of pen on paper. Then Pemberton looked up, his gaze moving between them with an intensity that made Ethan's skin prickle. "Miss Hale, I must ask, and please understand this is purely procedural, has Mr. Mercer made any improper advances? Any suggestions of arrangement beyond what was contracted?" Clara's face flushed crimson. "Absolutely not. Mr. Mercer has been a perfect gentleman." "I see." Pemberton set down his pen, his expression shifting to something that looked almost sympathetic. "Miss Hale, I'm afraid I must share some information with you. Information that came to light during our routine background verification." The air in the room seemed to thin. Ethan watched Clara's face drain of color, watched her hands grip the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "What information?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "The agency conducted a more thorough investigation after your placement, given the unusual circumstances of your substitution for Mrs. Whitfield." Pemberton pulled another document from his satchel. "We contacted your previous employer, the DeWitt estate. The nephew who inherited, a Mr. Charles DeWitt, was quite forthcoming about the reasons for your dismissal." "That's a lie." Clara's voice shook with sudden fury. "I told you what happened. His son attacked me, and they blamed—" "Mrs. DeWitt had no son, Miss Hale." Pemberton's voice was gentle but implacable. "She was a spinster. Mr. Charles DeWitt reported that you were dismissed for theft. Small items at first, jewelry, household silver. When confronted, you became hysterical and made wild accusations to deflect blame." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the room. Ethan stared at Clara, seeing her face crumple, seeing the devastation in her eyes. "No," she shook her head violently. "No, that's not true. He's lying. Charles wanted me gone because I refused his advances after his aunt died. This is his revenge for—" "Miss Hale, I have it documented here." Pemberton held up the paper. Signed statements, dates, details of missing items. I'm sorry, but the evidence is quite clear. I didn't steal anything, Claire's voice broke. Ethan, you have to believe me. I would never. But Ethan had gone very still, his mind reeling. He thought about how easily she'd integrated into his household, how she'd known where everything was, how to make the most of limited resources, how little he actually knew about her beyond what she'd told him. And what if she'd been lying? What if the whole sad story about her family, her dismissal, her desperation, what if it had all been calculated to gain his sympathy? Mr. Mercer, Pemberton's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. I must advise you that the agency cannot, in good conscience, allow this placement to continue. Miss Hale has violated the terms of her contract through misrepresentation of her character and history. We'll arrange for her transportation back east and refund your fees. Ethan, please. Clara reached for him and he took a step back instinctively. The hurt that flashed across her face was like a physical blow, but he couldn't think past the roaring in his ears, the fear that was rising like floodwater. He'd let her into his home, into his children's hearts. He'd been starting to open his own damaged heart to the possibility of trusting again, and all along she might have been deceiving him, might have been stealing from him. He'd been so focused on the children he hadn't kept track of household items. Margaret's jewelry was in a box upstairs. Had Clara been through it? Was that why she'd been so eager to stay, so willing to work for room and board at first? Papa? Tommy's voice was small and frightened. What's happening? Why is the man saying bad things about Miss Clara? Ethan looked at his son, at Sarah, who was crying into Clara's skirts, and something cold and hard settled in his chest. He'd been a fool. He'd let hope and loneliness cloud his judgment, and now his children would pay the price. Tommy, take your sister upstairs. His voice came out flat, emotionless. Now. But Papa. Now, son. Tommy obeyed reluctantly, pulling a sobbing Sarah away from Clara. The children's footsteps on the stairs sounded like a funeral march. When they were gone, Ethan forced himself to look at Clara. She stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped in front of her as if in supplication. Is any of it true? He asked quietly. The family you said you lost, the son who attacked you, was any of it real? All of it was real. Her voice was raw with desperation. Ethan, I swear to you on everything I hold sacred. You hold nothing sacred. The words exploded from him with all the fear and betrayal churning in his gut. You came here under false pretenses. You wormed your way into my children's affections, into my trust, and the whole time you were lying. What were you planning? To rob me blind and disappear? To wait until I was fool enough to marry you and then take everything? No, how can you even think? Clara choked on a sob. I love those children. I love this place. I would never hurt any of you. Love. Ethan laughed bitterly. You don't know what that word means. Love is truth, Clara. It's trust, and you've given me neither. Mr. Mercer, I understand you're upset. Pemberton's voice was maddeningly calm. But I must insist that Miss Hale vacate the premises immediately. Her continued presence here could compromise your reputation, and she'll be gone by morning. Ethan cut him off, unable to look at Clara's stricken face any longer. I'll take her into town myself, make sure she gets on the stage. You can send your refund to my account. Ethan, please, Clara's voice was breaking. Just let me explain. Let me prove. There's nothing to prove. He forced the words past the constriction in his throat. I trusted you. I let you into my children's lives. That was my mistake, and I'll own it. But I won't compound it by giving you another chance to deceive us. He turned away, unable to bear the devastation in her eyes, the way her whole body seemed to be collapsing inward. Behind him, he heard Pemberton gathering his papers, heard Clara's ragged breathing. I'll return tomorrow to escort Miss Hale to town, Pemberton said. Unless you'd prefer I take her now. Tomorrow. Ethan's hands gripped the back of a chair until his knuckles went white. Give her tonight to gather her things. Very well. Good day, Mr. Mercer. I'm sorry this didn't work out as planned. The door closed behind Pemberton, leaving them alone in the terrible silence. Ethan couldn't move, couldn't turn around, couldn't face what he'd just done. I didn't steal anything. Clara's voice was barely audible. And I didn't lie about my family or what happened to me. Charles DeWitt is a cruel man who wanted something I wouldn't give, and this is his revenge. But you'll never believe that now, will you? You've already decided I'm guilty. What am I supposed to believe? Ethan turned finally, and the sight of her face, tear-streaked, devastated, but still holding a shred of dignity, nearly undid his resolve. A man I've never met with documented evidence, or a woman who admits she came here under false pretenses? I came here desperate and terrified, yes. But everything I told you about myself was true. Everything I've done here has been honest. She wiped at her tears with shaking hands. But I understand. You've been hurt before. You lost your wife, and you're terrified of losing again, so it's easier to push me away now before you're in any deeper. Easier to believe the worst than to risk believing in me. The words hit too close to home, striking at truths he wasn't ready to acknowledge. Don't pretend you know what I'm feeling. I know exactly what you're feeling, because I feel it too. Clara's voice rose with sudden passion. I'm terrified every single day that this will end, that I'll lose this family I've come to love. But I choose to trust anyway. I choose to believe in the goodness I've found here, even knowing it could all be taken away. That's what love is, Ethan. It's choosing to be vulnerable even when it's terrifying. And look where that got you. The cruelty of his words tasted like ash on his tongue. You trusted, and you're being sent away. Maybe you should have protected yourself better. Clara flinched as if he'd struck her. For a long moment, she just stared at him, and he watched something die in her eyes. The hope, the warmth, the tentative affection that had been growing between them. When she spoke again, her voice was eerily calm. You're right. I should have protected myself better. She straightened her shoulders, gathering the tattered remains of her dignity. I'll pack my things tonight. You won't have to see me in the morning. I'll be gone before dawn. Clara, he didn't know what he meant to say. What words could possibly bridge the chasm that had opened between them? Don't. She held up a hand, stopping him. You've made yourself clear. I'm a liar and a thief, not to be trusted. There's nothing more to say. She turned and walked toward her room, her steps measured and steady despite the trembling in her hands. At the doorway, she paused without looking back. For what it's worth, Ethan Mercer, I hope someday you find the courage to trust again. To believe that not everyone will leave you or betray you. Your children deserve a father who can show them that love is worth the risk. Her voice caught. And you deserve to be happy, even if you can't believe that right now. Then she was gone. The door closing softly behind her, and Ethan was left alone in the kitchen that still smelled of the bread she'd baked that morning, surrounded by the evidence of her presence. The curtains she'd mended, the floor she'd scrubbed, the table where they'd shared meals and conversation, and slowly, carefully, begun to build something that felt like family. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands, and tried to convince himself he'd done the right thing. Tried to believe that protecting his children from potential betrayal was worth the cost of sending her away. Tried to ignore the voice in his head that whispered he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Upstairs, he could hear Tommy trying to comfort Sarah, whose sobs carried through the floorboards. And from Clara's room, nothing, not a sound, as if she'd simply ceased to exist. That night was the longest of Ethan's life. He tried to do the evening chores to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but everything felt wrong. The barn was too quiet without Clara's voice calling the children for supper. The house was too empty without her humming in the kitchen. Even the horses seemed to sense something was amiss, shifting restlessly in their stalls. When he came back inside, he found Tommy waiting for him in the parlor, his small face set with determination. "Papa, we need to talk." Ethan sighed, too exhausted for this conversation. "Tommy, it's late. You should be in bed." "I'm not going to bed until you tell me why you're sending Miss Clara away." The boy's chin jutted out stubbornly. "She didn't do anything wrong. I know she didn't." "Tommy, there are things you don't understand. Adult things. I understand that she makes Sarah stop crying. I understand that she helped me with my reading when you were too busy. I understand that she sat up all night when Sarah had the fever and you were scared." Tommy's voice cracked. "I understand that she loves us, Papa, and I think you love her too, even if you're too scared to admit it." "That's enough." Ethan's voice came out harsher than he intended. "You're a child. You don't know what you're talking about." "I know what Mama would say." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "She'd say you're being a coward. She'd say you're letting fear make you cruel. She'd say, "Don't you dare tell me what your mother would say," Ethan roared, his control finally snapping. "Your mother is dead, Tommy. She's gone, and she's not coming back, and you don't get to use her memory to make me feel guilty about protecting you." The silence that followed was absolute. Tommy stared at his father with wide, shocked eyes, tears spilling down his cheeks. Then, without a word, the boy turned and ran upstairs, his door slamming hard enough to shake the walls. Ethan stood in the empty parlor, his chest heaving, his hands shaking with the force of his emotions. He'd never yelled at Tommy like that, never thrown Margaret's death in his son's face. The shame of it threatened to choke him. A soft sound made him turn. Clara stood in the doorway of her room, a carpet bag in her hand, the same worn bag she'd arrived with, now repacked with her few possessions. She'd changed into her traveling dress, the same gray garment she'd worn that first day at the station. Her hair was pinned up severely, her face pale, but composed. "I'm leaving now," she said quietly. "I can't wait until morning. I won't spend another night in a house where I'm not wanted, and I won't let those children see me sent away like a criminal." "It's dark," Ethan protested weakly. "The roads—" "I'll manage. I've managed worse." She set the bag down and pulled something from her pocket, a folded piece of paper. "This is a letter for the children. Will you give it to them in the morning, or burn it? Whatever you think best." He took the letter with numb fingers, staring at his name written in her careful script on the outside. "I'm leaving the wages you paid me on the kitchen table. I don't want your money, Ethan. I never did." Her voice was steady, but he could see the tears she was fighting to hold back. "I wanted a home. I wanted to belong. I wanted to matter to someone. For a few brief weeks, I thought I'd found all of that here. I was wrong. Clara, The words stuck in his throat. What could he say? That he was sorry? That he was terrified? That sending her away was tearing him apart, but he couldn't stop himself because fear was stronger than hope? "Don't." She held up a hand, the same gesture she'd used earlier. "There's nothing you can say that will make this hurt less, for either of us." She picked up her bag, squaring her shoulders. "Goodbye, Ethan Mercer. Take care of those beautiful children. They deserve better than what life has given them so far." She walked toward the door, and Ethan knew he should stop her, knew he should say something, do something, but he was frozen. Paralyzed by fear and stubborn pride, and the absolute certainty that trusting her would lead to more pain than he could survive. Clara paused at the door, her hand on the knob. "That man was lying, you know, about the theft, about all of it. But you'll never believe me, so what does it matter?" She looked back at him one last time, and the sorrow in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "I loved you, Ethan. Not the idea of you, not the security you could provide, but you. Your stubborn pride and your wounded heart, and the way you loved your children even when you didn't know how to show it. I loved all of you, and I would have spent my life proving you could trust me. But you never gave me that chance." Then she was gone, the door closing behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty house. Ethan stood frozen, listening to her footsteps on the porch, the creak of the gate. He should go after her, should stop her from walking into the night alone and unprotected. Should admit that fear was making him cruel, just as Tommy had said. But he didn't move, didn't call out, didn't do anything but stand there clutching the letter she'd written, fighting against the part of himself that screamed he was making a terrible mistake. It wasn't until he heard the gate close that he finally moved, lurching to the window in time to see her small figure disappearing into the darkness, the carpetbag hanging from one hand, her other hand raised to wipe at her face. And then she was gone, swallowed by the night and the rain, and all that remained was the terrible, suffocating silence. Ethan sank to the floor, the letter crumpling in his fist, and finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he'd done. He'd sent away the best thing that had happened to his family in 2 years. He'd let fear and suspicion destroy something precious and rare. He'd chosen safety over hope, loneliness over love, and in doing so, he'd hurt everyone he cared about, including himself most of all. The letter in his hand seemed to burn against his palm. With shaking fingers, he unfolded it, his eyes scanning the words written in Clara's careful hand. "My dearest Tommy and Sarah, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Your father will tell you why, and he'll be right to send me away if he truly believes I'm not who I said I was. A father's first duty is to protect his children, and he's doing what he thinks is best. I want you to know that the time I spent with you was the happiest of my life. Tommy, your curiosity and brave heart remind me so much of my brother. Never stop asking questions. Never stop looking for truth in a world that often settles for easy answers. Sarah, my sweet girl, your laughter could light up the darkest days. Keep that joy inside you always. And don't be afraid to love freely, even when love sometimes hurts. I'm sorry I couldn't stay to watch you grow. Sorry I won't be there for first days of school and lost teeth and all the small moments that make a childhood. But I'll carry you both in my heart wherever I go, and I'll remember how it felt to be part of a family again, even briefly. Take care of your father. He loves you more than anything in this world, even when his fear makes him seem hard. Be patient with him. He's learning to live again after losing your mother, and that's the bravest thing anyone can do. All my love, forever, Clara. P.S. Tommy, the books in my room are for you. Read them and remember me. Sarah, I left the ribbons I used for your hair. May they always remind you that you're beautiful and loved. The words blurred as Ethan's eyes filled with tears. This wasn't the letter of a thief or a liar. This was the letter of a woman who genuinely loved his children, who'd understood them and cared for them and wanted only their happiness even as she left. And he'd sent her away into the night, alone, unprotected, with nothing but a worn carpet bag and a broken heart. What had he done? The question echoed through the empty house, unanswered and unanswerable, as the rain continued to fall and the darkness pressed in from all sides, heavier than it had ever been before. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in the parlor as the hours crawled past, Clara's letter clutched in his hand, his mind replaying every moment since Pemberton's arrival. Every word spoken, every accusation made, every terrible thing he'd said to the woman who'd brought light back into his broken home. Dawn came gray and cold, the rain finally slowing to a dispirited drizzle. Ethan heard small footsteps on the stairs and looked up to find both children standing in the doorway, their faces pinched with worry and exhaustion. Neither had slept either, by the looks of them. Is she gone? Tommy's voice was flat, already knowing the answer. Yes. The words scraped Ethan's throat raw. Sarah's lower lip trembled. Forever? I don't know, baby girl. Ethan held out his arms, and both children came to him, climbing into his lap like they hadn't done in months. They were getting too big for this, long-limbed and awkward in their grief, but he held them anyway, breathing in the scent of their hair and trying to find words that would make this right. Why did you make her leave? Tommy demanded, his voice muffled against Ethan's chest. What did that man say that made you so angry? Ethan had been dreading this question. How did you explain adult betrayals to children? How did you make them understand suspicion and fear when all they'd known from Clara was kindness? He said Clara lied to us, that she was dismissed from her last position for stealing, not for the reason she told us. Even saying it out loud made Ethan feel sick. He had papers, documentation. Did you ask Clara if it was true? Tommy pulled back to look at his father directly. Did you let her explain? She said the man was lying, but you didn't believe her. Tommy's voice carried an edge of disappointment that cut deeper than anger could have. You believed a stranger instead of someone who's taken care of us for weeks, someone who loved us. It's not that simple, son. I have to protect you both. If there was even a chance she was lying, that she might hurt you. She already hurt us. Sarah's voice rose to a wail. She hurt us by leaving. You made her go away, and now my heart hurts, Papa. The simple, devastating truth of it knocked the breath from Ethan's lungs. In trying to protect his children from potential harm, he'd inflicted certain harm. They were crying for Clara the way they'd cried for Margaret, and he'd caused it. He'd chosen suspicion over trust, fear over hope, and his children were paying the price. I'm sorry, he whispered, holding them tighter. I'm so sorry. Being sorry doesn't bring her back, Tommy said, his child's wisdom cutting straight to the heart of things. You have to go get her, Papa. You have to tell her you made a mistake. It's not that easy. She's probably already in town, maybe already on the stage. Then go to town. Tommy pushed away from him, his face flushed with anger and tears. Go find her and tell her the truth. What truth? That you love her? The boy's voice cracked. That you're scared because Mama died, and you think everyone you love will leave. That you pushed Clara away because it hurt less than waiting for her to leave on her own. Tell her the truth, Papa, before it's too late. Ethan stared at his 6-year-old son, stunned by the accuracy of the observation. When had Tommy grown so perceptive? When had he learned to see past his father's defenses to the wounded heart beneath? I don't know if she'd forgive me, Ethan said quietly. I said terrible things to her. I called her a liar and a thief. I threw her out into the night without even listening to her side of the story. Then you grovel, Tommy said, with the stubborn determination he'd inherited from his mother. You apologize and you beg and you keep trying until she believes you mean it. That's what Mama always said. When you hurt someone you love, you make it right no matter how hard it is. You really think I love her? Ethan needed to hear it said out loud, needed his son's certainty to bolster his own wavering conviction. I know you do. I see how you look at her when she's not watching. I hear you laugh at her jokes. I saw you smile more in the past month than you have in the whole year since Mama died. Tommy's voice softened. It's okay to love someone else, Papa. Mama would want you to be happy. She'd want us all to be happy. The permission he'd been waiting for came from his 6-year-old son, and it broke something open in Ethan's chest. All the fear and guilt and stubborn pride he'd been carrying since Margaret's death. Tears he'd been holding back for months finally fell, running hot down his face as he pulled his children close. You're right, he said roughly. You're absolutely right. I love her. I think I started loving her the day she caught Sarah when she fell, but I was too scared to admit it, too scared to risk my heart again. So go get her, Sarah said, patting his face with her small hand. Go get our Clara and bring her home. Ethan stood, setting the children down gently. His mind was already racing, calculating. If Clara had walked to town last night in the rain, she would have arrived sometime around midnight. The stage didn't leave until mid-morning. If he rode hard, if the roads weren't too muddy from the rain, he might catch her before Pemberton put her on that stage and sent her back east. I'm going, he said, striding toward the door. Tommy, you're in charge. Keep your sister inside, don't open the door for anyone, and if I'm not back by dark, ride to the Morrison place and stay with them. Understand? Yes, sir. Tommy straightened his shoulders, trying to look responsible. Papa? When you find her, tell her we miss her. Tell her Sarah needs her to finish the story about the princess, and I need help with long division, and I need her to come home, Ethan finished. I'll tell her. He grabbed his coat and hat, his mind still reeling as he saddled his fastest horse. The morning was cold and damp, the road slick with mud, but he pushed the horse hard anyway, driven by a desperation he hadn't felt since the day Margaret stopped breathing. The 7-mile ride to town took half the time it usually did. Ethan's horse was lathered and blowing by the time they reached Redemption, but he didn't slow until he reached the boarding house where travelers usually waited for the stage. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the establishment, was sweeping the porch when he dismounted. Her eyebrows rose at the sight of him, wild-eyed, mud-splattered, looking like a man possessed. Ethan Mercer, you look like you've ridden through hell itself. Is there a young woman staying here? Auburn hair, green eyes, would have arrived late last night? The words tumbled out in a rush. Mrs. Henderson's expression softened with something like pity. There was. Poor thing was soaked through and shivering when she knocked on my door around midnight. I gave her a room and some hot tea, tried to get her to talk, but she just thanked me and went straight to bed. Is she still here? Please tell me she's still here. No, hun, that registry agent came for her first thing this morning. They're over at the general store now, waiting for the stage. Should be here any... Ethan didn't wait to hear the rest. He was already running toward the general store, his boots splashing through puddles, his heart hammering against his ribs. He burst through the door hard enough to make the bell jangle violently, startling the few customers inside. Clara stood near the window with her carpet bag at her feet, Pemberton beside her going through papers. She looked small and defeated in the gray morning light, her traveling dress still damp from last night's rain, her face pale and drawn. When she looked up at his entrance, her eyes widened with something that might have been hope before it shuttered closed behind walls of self-protection. Mr. Mercer. Pemberton's voice was cool and professional. I wasn't expecting to see you in town today. I need to speak with Clara. Ethan ignored the agent entirely, his focus locked on the woman who'd haunted his sleepless night. Privately, I'm afraid that's not possible. Miss Hale is in the agency's custody now, and I don't care whose custody she's in. I need 5 minutes. Ethan's voice carried an edge of desperation that made several townspeople turn to stare. Please, Clara, just give me 5 minutes to say what I should have said last night. Clara's throat worked as she swallowed hard. For a moment, he thought she'd refuse, and he couldn't have blamed her. But then she nodded slowly and picked up her bag. 5 minutes, she agreed quietly. But not here. Outside. They walked out into the gray morning, leaving Pemberton's sputtering protests behind them. Clara led the way to the side of the building, away from curious eyes, and set her bag down carefully before turning to face him. You have 5 minutes, she said, her voice carefully neutral. What do you want, Ethan? Now that she was in front of him, all the words he'd rehearsed during the frantic ride fled his mind. He stood there staring at her, at the shadows under her eyes that matched his own, at the rigid set of her shoulders, at the way she held herself together through sheer force of will, despite the devastation visible in her eyes. I was wrong, he finally managed, about everything. I should have listened to you, should have given you a chance to defend yourself instead of believing the worst. And yet you didn't. Her voice remained steady, but he could see her hands trembling slightly. Why should I believe you now when you wouldn't believe me then? Because I spent all night reading the letter you left for my children. Because I watched them cry for you this morning and realized I'd hurt all of us trying to protect us from hurt. He took a step closer, and she took a step back, maintaining the distance between them. Because I'm terrified and stupid and so damaged by loss that I lashed out at the first sign of trouble instead of fighting for what we had. What did we have, Ethan? Clara's composure was cracking, her voice rising with emotion. A business arrangement? A temporary solution to your household problems? Because that's all you ever said it was, even when it felt like so much more. It was more. It is more. The admission came easier than he'd expected. You were right last night when you said I was scared of losing again. I've been so focused on protecting my heart that I didn't realize I'd already lost it. I love you, Clara. I think I've loved you since the day you stayed, since you chose to be brave enough to fight for a place in our lives. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her voice remained firm. You love me, but you don't trust me. And love without trust is just pretty words, Ethan. It's not enough to build a life on. You're right. That's why I'm here, to prove I do trust you. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small drawstring bag. After you left, I went through Margaret's jewelry box, the one I haven't opened since she died. Everything was there, every piece, exactly as she left it. Nothing missing, nothing even disturbed. Clara stared at the bag, understanding dawning in her eyes. You checked to see if I'd stolen from you. Yes, and I found nothing because there was nothing to find. You told me the truth, and I should have believed you without needing proof. He held the bag out to her. This was Margaret's. She would have wanted you to have it. I can't accept that. Clara pushed his hand away gently. Those belong to your children, to their mother's memory. Margaret would have wanted someone who loved our children to wear them, someone who brought joy back to our home. Ethan's voice roughened with emotion. She would have liked you, Clara. She would have seen what I was too blind to see, that you're exactly what our family needed. Don't. Clara's voice broke on the word. Don't say these things just because you feel guilty. Don't offer me Margaret's jewelry because you think it will fix what you broke. I won't be your consolation prize, Ethan. I won't be the woman you settle for because you're lonely. Is that what you think this is? Ethan grabbed her hands before she could pull away, holding them between his own. Clara, you're not my consolation prize. You're my second chance. My hope that life can be good again despite all the loss. You're the woman my children love, the woman I was stupid enough to push away because I was too scared to admit how much I need you. You sent me away. The accusation carried the weight of all her hurt. You looked at me with disgust and called me a liar. You threw my love back in my face like it meant nothing. How am I supposed to forget that? How am I supposed to trust that you won't do it again the next time someone says something bad about me? You can't, Ethan admitted, and saw her face crumple at the honesty. I can't promise I'll always get it right, Clara. I can't promise my fear won't make me stupid again, but I can promise to fight it, to choose trust over suspicion, hope over fear, to believe in you even when it's hard. That's not good enough. Clara pulled her hands free, wrapping her arms around herself. I've already been rejected too many times, Ethan. By my employer who wouldn't defend me, by the agency who sent me as a substitute, by you when you needed someone to blame. I can't survive another rejection. I'm not strong enough. You're the strongest person I know, Ethan said fiercely. You survived losing your entire family. You survived being wrongly accused and dismissed. You survived walking away from the only home you'd found in years because I was too broken to see your worth. If anyone's not strong enough here, it's me. Then why should I come back? The question was barely a whisper. Why should I risk my heart again when you've already proven you'll choose fear over me? Ethan took a shaky breath, knowing his next words would either save them or destroy any chance they had left. Because my children are home right now drawing you a picture. Because they told me to grovel and beg and keep trying until you believe I mean it. Because Tommy said their mama would want us all to be happy, and we're only happy when you're with us. Claire's face twisted with grief and longing. Don't use the children against me. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. It's not fair that you lost your family. It's not fair that I lost my wife. It's not fair that we found each other at all when we were both so broken. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. But here we are anyway, and I'm asking you to take another risk, to give me one more chance to prove I can be the man you deserve. What's that? Clara stared at the box with wide eyes. Open it. With trembling hands, she took the box and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a simple gold ring, not Margaret's wedding band, but a different ring entirely. One Ethan had bought years ago from a traveling jeweler, thinking Margaret might like it, but she'd died before he could give it to her. It's not much, Ethan said quietly. Not fancy or expensive, but it's never belonged to anyone else. It would be yours and yours alone. He dropped to one knee in the mud, ignoring the shocked gasps from townspeople who'd gathered at the edge of the building to watch. Marry me, Clara. Not because you need security or because the children need a mother, but because I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving you can trust me. Clara stared down at him, tears streaming unchecked down her face. You're proposing? Now? After everything? Yes, because I'm a fool who almost lost the best thing to ever happen to him, and I won't make that mistake twice. Ethan's voice shook. I know I hurt you. I know I have to earn back your trust, but I'm asking you to give me that chance. Come home with me. Let me spend every day showing you that you're chosen, you're wanted, you're loved exactly as you are. For a long, terrible moment, Clara just stood there, the ring box clutched in her hands, her face a battlefield of warring emotions. Ethan stayed on his knee in the mud, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs, waiting for the verdict that would determine the rest of his life. I need to know something first, Clara said finally, her voice barely steady. Did you believe Pemberton because you wanted an excuse to push me away? Because it was easier to think the worst of me than to risk loving me? The question pierced straight to the truth Ethan had been avoiding. He could lie, could soften it, but she deserved better than that. Part of me did, he admitted, the words like glass in his throat. Part of me was looking for a reason to end things before they got too deep, before I cared too much. I've been so terrified of losing again that I sabotaged the best thing I had. He met her eyes directly, letting her see all his broken pieces. But that's on me, Clara. That's my damage, my cowardice. And I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life fighting that fear instead of letting it destroy us. How do I know you won't do it again? The question held all her accumulated pain. How do I know that next time something goes wrong, you won't throw me away like yesterday's trash? You don't know. You have to trust me, the same way I should have trusted you. Ethan held out his hand, palm up, an offering and a plea. I'm asking you to be braver than I was, to take a leap of faith even though I gave you every reason not to. And I know that's asking too much, but I'm asking anyway because the alternative is losing you, and I can't do that. I won't survive it. Clara looked at his outstretched hand, at the ring still in the box, at the man kneeling in the mud before her with his heart laid bare. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with tears. I told you once that I came west looking for something real, something that mattered. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I found it with you and those children. I found a home and a purpose and love that made me feel alive for the first time in years. And then you took it away. I know. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Ethan's voice broke. But I'm begging you, Clara, don't let my mistake be the end of our story. Let it be the middle, the hard part we have to get through to reach something better. You really think we can get through this? Hope and fear warred in her eyes. You think we can build something real from this much broken? I know we can, because you're not a quitter, and neither am I. Because those kids at home need both of us. Because love doesn't mean never making mistakes, it means choosing to forgive them and try again. He gestured to the ring. So what do you say? Will you marry me and let me spend my life making this right? Clara looked down at the ring, then back at Ethan, then at the small crowd of onlookers who'd gathered to witness this spectacle. Mrs. Abernathy from the general store was dabbing at her eyes with her apron. Old Bill Morrison was grinning like a fool. Even Pemberton had emerged from the store, his professional detachment cracking around the edges. If I say yes, Clara said slowly, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that when you're scared, when you want to push me away, you'll talk to me instead. Promise me you'll let me in instead of shutting me out. Her voice strengthened. Promise me that our marriage will be built on truth, even when the truth is hard, even when it's I'm terrified or I don't know how to do this. I need honesty more than I need perfection, Ethan. I promise. He said it without hesitation. No more walls, no more running. When I'm scared, I'll tell you. When I mess up, I'll own it. And when you need reassurance that you're chosen and wanted and loved, I'll give it to you every single day for the rest of our lives. Clara's face softened, and Ethan saw the exact moment her decision crystallized. She knelt down in the mud beside him, heedless of her dress, and took his face between her hands. Then yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I'm desperate or because I have nowhere else to go, but because I love you. Because I love those children. Because I believe in second chances and the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds. Ethan's hands came up to cover hers, and he leaned forward until their foreheads touched. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you for being brave enough to say yes when I gave you every reason to say no. Don't make me regret it, Clara said, but there was a tremulous smile playing at her lips now. I won't. I swear I won't. He pulled back just enough to take the ring from the box and slip it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for her hand specifically. There. Now you're mine, and I'm yours, and no registry agent can change that. Speaking of which, Clara glanced over her shoulder at Pemberton, who looked thoroughly confused by this turn of events. What about him? Ethan stood and helped Clara to her feet, keeping her hand firmly in his. They approached Pemberton together, united now in a way they hadn't been before. Mr. Pemberton, Ethan said with more confidence than he'd felt in days, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Miss Hale won't be returning east after all. She's staying here as my fiancée, and will be married as soon as arrangements can be made. Pemberton's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Mr. Mercer, I must caution you against hasty decisions. The documentation I showed you clearly indicated your documentation was falsified, Clara interrupted, her voice steady and sure now. Charles DeWitt is a bitter, vengeful man who couldn't stand being rejected. He created those lies to punish me for refusing his advances after his aunt's death. I have letters from Mrs. DeWitt herself praising my character and work. They're in my bag if you'd like to see them. I would, actually. Pemberton's professional curiosity seemed genuinely engaged now. If what you're saying is true, the agency has been grossly misled and will need to update our records. While Clara retrieved the letters from her carpet bag, Ethan found himself surrounded by well-wishers from the town. Mrs. Abernathy hugged him fiercely, whispering that Margaret would have approved. Bill Morrison clapped him on the back and offered to drive them home in his wagon so Ethan's exhausted horse could rest. Even the town minister appeared, offering to perform the ceremony whenever they were ready. Pemberton finished reading Clara's letters and looked up with something approaching chagrin on his face. These are compelling evidence of your character, Miss Hale. It appears I may have been too hasty in accepting Mr. DeWitt's account without further investigation. He pulled out his papers and began making notes. I'll file a formal complaint against him with the agency. This kind of character assassination cannot be tolerated. Thank you, Clara said quietly. But honestly, I don't care anymore what the agency does. I have everything I need right here. She looked at Ethan as she said it, and the love shining in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees again. How had he almost lost this? How had he come so close to throwing away the woman who'd brought his family back to life? The ride home in Bill's wagon was quiet, Ethan and Clara sitting close together in the back, her hand never leaving his. The morning had turned clearer, the clouds breaking apart to reveal patches of blue sky, as if even the weather was celebrating their reconciliation. The children are going to be so happy, Clara said softly, leaning her head against Ethan's shoulder. I've missed them so much, even for just one night. They've missed you too. Tommy said to tell you that Sarah needs you to finish the story about the princess, and he needs help with long division. Ethan pressed a kiss to her hair. And I need you to forgive me for being the world's biggest fool. Already forgiven. She turned her face up to his. But don't do it again, or I'll make you sleep in the barn. He laughed, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. Fair enough. When they finally reached the ranch, Tommy and Sarah were watching from the window. The moment they spotted Clara in the wagon, both children came flying out of the house, not even stopping for coats despite the chill in the air. You came back! Sarah launched herself at Clara the moment she climbed down from the wagon. You came back! You came back! I came back, Clara confirmed, catching the child and spinning her around. And I'm never leaving again. Your papa asked me to marry him, and I said yes. Tommy looked between his father and Clara, his young face splitting into a grin that rivaled the sun. I knew it! I knew he'd fix it! He threw his arms around both of them, and they stood there in the yard. 4 people who'd all known loss, who'd all been broken in different ways, coming together into something that felt surprisingly whole. Come on, Ethan said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Let's go home. And they did, walking up the porch steps together, Clara's hand in his and his children dancing around them with joy. The house welcomed them back with familiar creaks and the smell of home. And as Clara untied her bonnet and hung it on its usual peg, Ethan realized something profound. This wasn't about replacing what he'd lost. It was about honoring it by choosing to live fully again. Margaret would always be part of their story, would always hold a piece of his heart. But there was room for Clara too, room for new love that didn't diminish the old, for a future that acknowledged the past without being imprisoned by it. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Ethan and Clara sat together on the porch as they had so many times before. But now Clara wore his ring, and his arm was around her shoulders, and the future stretched before them full of possibility instead of fear. I have one more thing to give you, Ethan said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. I wrote this while you were gone, when I thought I'd lost you forever. I want you to read it, so you know exactly what you mean to me. Clara unfolded the paper, and in the lamplight she read the words he'd written in the darkest hours of the night. Clara. I've made many mistakes in my life, but letting you walk away was the worst. You came into our lives like unexpected grace, bringing light to dark corners and laughter to rooms that had known too much grief. I should have believed you, should have trusted the woman who sat up all night with my sick daughter, who made my son smile again, who transformed a house into a home through 1,000 small acts of love. Instead, I let fear make me cruel. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it. If you're reading this, it means I found the courage to come after you. If you're not, it means I failed, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting my cowardice. Either way, know this. You were never the wrong girl. You were exactly right. Right for my children, right for this ranch, right for my wounded heart. I was just too damaged to see it until it was almost too late. I love you, Clara Hale. I choose you. Now and always. Ethan. By the time she finished reading, tears were streaming down Clara's face. She folded the letter carefully and pressed it to her heart. Keep this safe, she whispered, for the times when we fight, or when I doubt, or when things get hard. Remind me that we chose each other, even when it was terrifying, especially when it was terrifying. I will, Ethan promised, gathering her close. And you keep reminding me that love is worth the risk, that opening my heart doesn't mean betraying Margaret's memory. It means honoring it by choosing to live fully again. They sat there under the stars, 2 broken people choosing to believe in healing, in second chances, in the possibility that the wrong girl on a dusty platform could turn out to be exactly the right choice after all. And somewhere in the house behind them, on a mantel next to Margaret's photograph, a new ring box sat waiting to become part of the family's story. Not erasing the past, but building a bridge to the future. A future that finally, blessedly, looked bright. The days following their engagement moved with a strange mixture of urgency and reverence, as if everyone understood they were building something sacred from the wreckage of what had almost been lost. Clara settled back into the household with a new confidence, no longer a temporary guest, but a permanent fixture. And the difference showed in 1,000 small ways. She rearranged the kitchen to suit her preferences without asking permission first. She hung her few dresses in the armoire in Ethan's room, not in it yet. Propriety still demanded separate sleeping arrangements until the wedding, but near it, a promise of futures intertwined. She disciplined the children when they needed it, making decisions about their care without deferring to Ethan first, because she was their mother now, in all but name. And Ethan let her. More than that, he welcomed it, this quiet claiming of space and authority in the home that would soon be legally hers as well as emotionally. But there was one conversation they still needed to have, one ghost that lingered in the corners of their new beginning. It came on a crisp evening a week after Clara's return, when the children were finally asleep and they sat together in the parlor, Clara mending one of Tommy's shirts while Ethan reviewed the ranch accounts. "Tell me about Margaret," Clara said suddenly, her needle pausing mid-stitch. Ethan looked up sharply, surprise and old pain flickering across his face. "What?" "Your wife, the children's mother. I need to know about her if I'm going to honor her memory properly." Clara set down the mending, giving him her full attention. "I need to understand who she was, what she meant to you, so I don't spend our marriage competing with a ghost." The request caught Ethan off guard. Most women would have avoided the subject, would have wanted to pretend the first wife had never existed. But Clara was asking him to remember, to share, to make Margaret part of the foundation they were building instead of a secret locked away. "What do you want to know?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Everything. How you met, what made you fall in love, what she was like as a mother, how she died." Clara's eyes were gentle but unwavering. "I want to know her, Ethan, because she's part of you and part of those children upstairs, and I can't love all of you without understanding her place in your hearts." So Ethan talked. Haltingly at first, then with increasing ease, he told Clara about meeting Margaret at a church social when he was just 22 and she was 19. How she'd been the prettiest girl there, but had chosen to sit with the awkward ranch hand instead of the more prosperous suitors. How she'd laughed at his terrible jokes and listened to his dreams of building something meaningful from the rough land his father had left him. She was fearless, he said, a sad smile touching his lips. Came west as a bride with nothing but a trunk of clothes and absolute faith that we'd make it work. Never complained when the first winter nearly killed us, when the cattle got sick, when I couldn't afford to buy her the things she deserved. She just rolled up her sleeves and worked beside me. "She sounds remarkable," Clara said softly. She was. She made everything better just by being in it. Ethan's throat tightened. Tommy has her stubborn streak, that determination to see things through no matter how hard they get. And Sarah has her laugh, this pure joy that could light up the darkest days. How did she die? The question he'd been dreading. Ethan stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkness beyond the glass. Winter fever. Started like a cold, turned into something worse. The doctor came, but there wasn't anything he could do. She fought for 3 weeks, getting weaker every day. His voice broke. At the end, she made me promise to take care of the children, to find someone who could love them the way they deserved. I think she knew I wouldn't be enough on my own. Clara came to stand beside him, her hand finding his. You were enough. You kept them alive, kept them safe, gave them all the love you had, even when you were drowning in grief yourself. Margaret would have been proud of you. I failed them, Ethan said bleakly. I was so lost in my own pain that I couldn't see theirs. I fed them and clothed them, but I didn't know how to comfort them. Didn't know how to make the house feel like a home again. That's why I sent for Eleanor Whitfield. I thought a capable, mature woman could fill the gap without... He trailed off. Without touching your heart, Clara finished gently. You wanted help, not love. Something safe that wouldn't risk hurting you again. Yes, and then you showed up instead and nothing went according to plan. He turned to face her fully. You scared me, Clara. Not because you weren't what I expected, but because you were so much more. You didn't just manage the household, you brought it back to life. You didn't just care for the children, you loved them fiercely. And you looked at me like I was worth something beyond my ability to provide and protect. You are worth something, Clara said firmly. You're worth being loved completely, Ethan, damage and all. So are you. He cupped her face in his hands. I need you to understand something. What I feel for you isn't a pale shadow of what I felt for Margaret. It's different, but not less. Margaret was my first love, my youth, my introduction to what it meant to build a life with someone. You're my second chance, my healing, my proof that the heart can break and still find wholeness again. Tears spilled down Claire's cheeks. I'm not trying to replace her. I know. That's what makes this work. You're not trying to be Margaret. You're being yourself, and that's exactly who we need. He kissed her forehead gently. I'll always love Margaret. She gave me those two beautiful children upstairs. She taught me what partnership meant, and she's woven into the fabric of who I am. But I love you too, Clara, in a way that honors what I had while choosing what we're building. Thank you, Clara whispered. Thank you for letting me know her, for not making her a forbidden subject. I want the children to talk about their mother, to remember her, to know that loving me doesn't mean forgetting her. They already know that. You've shown them it's possible to hold space for both grief and joy, remembering and moving forward. Ethan pulled her close, breathing in the lavender scent that had become as familiar as home. We're going to be all right, aren't we? This complicated, patched-together family of ours? Better than all right, Clara promised. We're going to be extraordinary. The wedding took shape in the way of frontier ceremonies, practical and simple, but no less meaningful for its lack of ostentation. Clara insisted on being married under the cottonwood tree in the yard, the same tree where Margaret's swing still hung, where the children played, where the roots ran deep into land that had sustained the Mercer family through joy and sorrow. It seems fitting, she told Ethan when he questioned the choice. This tree has been part of your family's story. I want it to be part of ours too. They set the date for 2 weeks after the engagement, enough time to make arrangements, but not so long that doubt could creep in and sabotage what they were building. Clara sewed herself a new dress, not white, that seemed presumptuous for a woman marrying a widower, but a soft blue that brought out the green of her eyes. Mrs. Morrison and Mrs. Abernathy helped with the preparations, bringing food and well wishes and gentle advice about marriage that made Clara blush and laugh in equal measure. Tommy and Sarah were involved in every decision, from what flowers to pick to what songs to sing. It was important to Clara that they understood this wasn't just their father taking a wife, it was their family choosing to become something new and whole together. The night before the wedding, as Clara tucked Sarah into bed, the little girl grabbed her hand with sudden fierceness. You're really going to be my mama tomorrow, forever and ever? Clara's heart clenched. I'm going to be your Clara forever and ever. I can't replace your first mama. She'll always be special and important. But I'll love you and take care of you and be here for all the things you need a mother for. Is that all right? Sarah considered this seriously. Can I call you Mama, or would that make Papa sad? Why don't you ask him? Clara suggested gently. So they went downstairs together, finding Ethan and Tommy in the parlor. Sarah climbed into her father's lap with the gravity of someone with an important question. Papa, when Clara marries you tomorrow, can I call her Mama? Or should I keep calling her Miss Clara? The room went very quiet. Ethan looked at Clara over Sarah's head, and she saw the war of emotions in his eyes, love for Margaret's memory tangled with hope for their future. What do you think, sweetheart? Ethan asked his daughter carefully. What feels right to you? I think she's going to be my mama, Sarah said with a child's perfect logic. She makes me breakfast and braids my hair and kisses my owies better and loves me. That's what mamas do. But I don't want you to be sad about my first mama. Oh, baby girl. Ethan's voice was thick with emotion. Your first mama would want you to have someone to call mama. She'd be happy you have someone who loves you so much. And it doesn't make me sad. It makes me grateful that you have Clara." Sarah turned to look at Clara with those solemn blue eyes. "Then I'm going to call you Mama, if that's okay." "It's more than okay," Clara managed around the lump in her throat. "It's the greatest honor you could give me." Tommy had been quiet through this exchange, his expression thoughtful. Now he spoke up, his voice tentative. "I remember my first mama better than Sarah does. I remember her voice and how she smelled like roses and how she used to sing to us at bedtime. I don't want to forget her." "You won't forget her," Clara assured him, kneeling beside Ethan's chair to be at eye level with the boy. "And you don't have to call me Mama if it doesn't feel right. You can call me Clara, or you can wait until you're ready, or you can choose something else entirely, whatever feels true to you." "What if I want to call you Mama too, but save my first mama in my heart as Ma?" Tommy's young face was creased with the effort of working through complicated emotions. "Is that okay? Can I have both?" "You can have both," Ethan said firmly. "Love doesn't run out, son. You can love your first mama and your new mama at the same time. Your heart is big enough for both." Tommy nodded slowly, then slipped from his seat to hug Clara fiercely. "Then I'm going to call you Mama too, because you earned it." The simple statement broke something open in Clara's chest. She gathered both children close, Ethan's arms coming around all of them, and they stayed there in a tangle of limbs and love and the stunning grace of second chances. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, October showing off its finest colors against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Clara woke early in her small room, nerves and excitement warring in her stomach. In a few hours, she'd be Clara Mercer. She'd have a family, a home, a place in the world that was legally and spiritually hers. Mrs. Morrison arrived to help her dress, her capable hands doing up the tiny buttons on the blue dress, while Clara tried to hold still. "You're shaking like a leaf," the older woman observed with affection. "Nervous?" "Terrified," Clara admitted. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't live up to Margaret's memory? What if—" "Stop right there." Mrs. Morrison turned Clara to face her, gripping her shoulders firmly. "You're not competing with a memory, child. You're writing your own story with that man and those children. Margaret was a good woman, but she's gone. You're here, and you're exactly what this family needs. So hold your head high and claim your place without apology." The words steadied Clara, giving her the courage to look at herself in the small mirror. The woman looking back was someone she almost didn't recognize, eyes bright with hope instead of shadowed with fear, face flushed with joy instead of pale with desperation. She looked like someone who belonged, who was chosen, who was loved. Downstairs, Ethan was dealing with his own pre-wedding nerves. He'd put on his best suit, the one he'd worn to marry Margaret, and immediately taken it off again. That felt wrong, like he was trying to recreate something that couldn't be repeated. Instead, he chose a new shirt Clara had made for him, simple but well-crafted, and his second-best pants that had been mended so many times, they were more Clara's stitches than original fabric. Tommy found him standing in front of the mirror, attempting to tame his hair into something presentable. "You look nice, Papa," the boy said. "Mama would have liked Clara's shirt." "Which Mama?" Ethan asked gently, wanting to be clear. "Both of them," Tommy said with simple confidence. "Ma would have wanted you to be happy, and Mama makes you happy, so they'd both approve." Out of the mouths of babes, Ethan thought, came the wisdom adults spent lifetimes learning. The ceremony was small, just a handful of neighbors, Bill Morrison officiating since he'd been ordained years ago for just such occasions, and the family at the heart of it all. The cottonwood tree spread its branches over them like a blessing, late autumn leaves drifting down in lazy spirals. Clara walked from the house with Tommy on one side and Sarah on the other, the children giving her away since she had no father to do it. She'd pinned her hair up with Margaret's combs, a gift from Ethan that morning, along with a note that said simply, "She'd want you to wear them, so do I." When Ethan saw her coming toward him, the whole world seemed to narrow to just her face, the determination in her eyes, the slight trembling of her hands, the smile that was equal parts nervous and radiant. This woman who'd come to him by mistake, who'd stayed through fear and doubt, who'd loved his children when they were strangers and loved him when he'd given her every reason not to. Bill Morrison cleared his throat, bringing the small gathering to attention. We're here to witness the joining of Ethan Mercer and Clara Hale in marriage. Now, I could give you some long speech about duty and commitment, but I think these two have already learned those lessons the hard way. Bill's eyes twinkled. Instead, I'm going to say this. Marriage is choosing each other every day, even on the days when it's hard, especially on those days. It's building something together from whatever materials you have, sometimes fine lumber, sometimes scraps and hope, and stubborn determination. He looked at Ethan and Clara directly. You've both known loss. You both carry scars. But you're choosing to believe that broken things can still make something beautiful when fitted together with care. That's not just marriage. That's faith. Ethan took Clara's hands, feeling them trembling slightly in his. His voice was steady when he spoke, the words coming from someplace deep and true. Clara, I'm not the easiest man to love. I'm stubborn and damaged, and I'll probably make mistakes that'll have you questioning this decision. A ripple of gentle laughter went through the small crowd, but I promise you this, I'll choose you every morning when I wake up and every evening when I come home. I'll trust you even when fear tells me not to. I'll believe in us even when the world says we're crazy to try. You're my second chance at love, at life, at being the man I want to be, and I'll spend every day earning the gift of your presence in my life. Clara's eyes were bright with tears. When she spoke, her voice carried clear and strong across the yard. Ethan, I came to your door a stranger, desperate and alone. You gave me shelter when you could have turned me away. You gave me a chance when I'd been told I wasn't worthy. And when you made a mistake, you found the courage to admit it and fight for us. She squeezed his hands. I promise to be patient with your fears, because I understand them. I promise to love your children as my own, because they already are. I promise to build a home with you that honors the past while embracing the future. You're not my second choice or my consolation prize. You're my answered prayer, my unexpected grace, my proof that hope is worth holding on to even in the darkest times. Bill Morrison smiled. Do you have rings? Ethan pulled out the simple gold band he'd bought for Clara, a match to the engagement ring that already graced her finger. As he slipped it on, he spoke the traditional words with entirely personal meaning. With this ring, I thee wed. All that I have, all that I am, I give to you. Clara's hands shook as she placed a band on Ethan's finger. She'd traded her mother's locket for it, the last valuable thing she owned, and didn't regret the sacrifice for a moment. With this ring, I thee wed. All that I have, all that I am, I give to you. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming and the sheer stubbornness of love itself, I pronounce you husband and wife. Bill's voice carried warmth and humor. Ethan, you may kiss your bride. Ethan cupped Clara's face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that spilled down her cheeks. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, a promise and a beginning wrapped into one tender moment. Around them, their neighbors applauded, but the sound seemed distant compared to the thundering of Ethan's heart, the certainty that he'd just made the best decision of his life. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah tugged on Clara's skirt. Are you really our mama now? Official and everything? Official and everything, Clara confirmed, scooping the child into her arms. Good. Sarah wrapped her arms around Clara's neck and squeezed tight. I love you, Mama. The word, said freely, joyfully, without reservation, made Clara's throat close with emotion. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Neighbors had brought food and tables were set up under the cottonwood tree. There was music from Bill Morrison's fiddle and dancing that turned the yard into a place of laughter and community. Tommy and Sarah ran wild with the other children, their joy infectious, while Ethan and Clara moved through the gathering accepting congratulations and well wishes. Mrs. Abernathy pulled Clara aside at one point, her eyes suspiciously bright. I owe you an apology, the older woman said quietly. I was one of the ones gossiping about you being here, suggesting impropriety. I was wrong. You're exactly what this family needed, and Ethan Mercer is a lucky man. Thank you, Clara said, squeezing the woman's hand. That means more than you know. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Ethan found Clara standing slightly apart from the celebration, looking out over the land that was now hers as much as his. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. Having second thoughts, Mrs. Mercer? She leaned back into his embrace, savoring the rightness of it. Not a single one. I was just thinking about how far I've come. 2 months ago, I was stepping off that stagecoach terrified and alone, certain I'd made a terrible mistake. And now you're home, Ethan finished. Yes. Clara turned in his arms to face him. I'm home. Not because of the land or the house, but because of you and Tommy and Sarah. You're my home, Ethan. Wherever you are, that's where I belong. Then I better make sure I never leave, he said, kissing her softly. Because I can't imagine this life without you in it anymore. You've become essential, like air or water, or the sun rising every morning. As twilight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, the celebration began to wind down. Neighbors said their goodbyes, leaving small gifts and final congratulations. Bill Morrison was the last to go, clasping Ethan's hand firmly. Take care of that wife of yours. She's special. I know, Ethan said. Believe me, I know. When everyone was finally gone and the children were reluctantly sent to bed, despite their protests that they weren't tired, Ethan and Clara found themselves alone for the first time as husband and wife. They stood together on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, comfortable in the silence that had become their own private language. What are you thinking? Clara asked eventually. That I ordered wrong, Ethan said, and felt her stiffen in his arms. He quickly continued. The agency sent me someone mature and experienced and practical, everything I thought I needed. Instead, they sent me you. Young and brave and full of so much love you didn't know what to do with it. And you were absolutely, perfectly right. Clara relaxed, a smile curving her lips. So when I cried on that platform that you'd ordered the wrong girl, I was lying when I said no. Ethan tightened his arms around her. I wasn't lying that I ordered right. I just didn't know it yet. I'd ordered right without even realizing it because something bigger than both of us knew exactly what this family needed. And what did we need? Clara turned to look up at him, her face soft in the starlight. We needed someone who'd been broken too. Someone who understood loss and fear but chose hope anyway. Someone brave enough to fight for love even when it was terrified. We needed you, Clara, exactly as you are. He paused, emotion thickening his voice. I told you that day at the station that I'd ordered right. I had no idea how true that was. Clara reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that grief and hard living had carved there. And I thought I was a mistake, a last-minute substitute, a consolation prize. I thought I'd have to prove my worth every single day. You did prove it, but not because you had to, because you couldn't help being exactly who you are. Generous and kind and so full of love that it spilled over onto all of us. Ethan captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. You weren't a mistake, sweetheart. You were a miracle. My second chance. My proof that life can be good again, even after unimaginable loss. We're both second chances, Clara said softly. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me a family when I'd lost everyone I loved. You gave me a reason to hope again. They stood together under the vast Wyoming sky, two wounded souls who'd found healing in each other, a family built not from perfection, but from the courage to try again. Inside the house, Tommy and Sarah slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. Tomorrow would bring all the ordinary challenges of ranch life, cattle to tend, meals to cook, a household to manage. But tonight was for savoring the extraordinary grace of second chances, and answered prayers and love that chose to bloom even in the hardest soil. Come on, Mrs. Mercer, Ethan said finally, leading Clara toward the door. Let's go home. We're already home, Claire replied, but she followed him anyway, her hand secure in his. And as they crossed the threshold together, husband and wife, partners in all things, two broken pieces fitted together into something whole. The house seemed to exhale with contentment, as if it too recognized that the long season of grief had finally ended and something new had begun. That night, lying together for the first time as man and wife, Clara whispered into the darkness, "Do you think she would have approved? Margaret?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering. "Yes, She would have seen what I was too stubborn to see at first, that you love our children fiercely, that you're brave and true, that you make me want to be better. She would have been grateful you came when you did, that you were stubborn enough to stay." He paused. "And I think she'd be at peace knowing the children have a mother who loves them and a father who's finally learning to live again instead of just surviving." "Thank you," Clara breathed, "for letting her be part of our story instead of a secret we can't speak of, for understanding that I'm not trying to erase her." "You couldn't erase her if you tried. She's woven into this family's fabric." Ethan pulled Clara closer. "But so are you now, and that's exactly how it should be." They drifted towards sleep, wrapped in each other, the future stretching before them uncertain but no longer frightening. Whatever came, hard winters, difficult harvests, the inevitable struggles of life on the frontier, they would face it together, this patchwork family built from loss and hope, and the stubborn determination to believe in love even when it seemed impossible. 3 days later, a letter arrived from the Western Matrimonial Agency. Clara opened it with trembling hands, Ethan reading over her shoulder. "Dear Mr. Mercer and Miss Hale, following our investigation into the allegations made by Mr. Awascott, Charles DeWitt regarding Miss Hale's character, we have determined that said allegations were entirely false and motivated by personal vengeance. Mr. DeWitt has been reported to the appropriate authorities for fraud and character defamation. Furthermore, we have located the original correspondence intended for Mr. Mercer. It appears Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield did indeed fall ill before her scheduled departure. However, the agent who substituted Miss Hale in her place did so without proper authorization and has been dismissed from the agency's employ. That said, after reviewing Miss Hale's references from the late Mrs. Catherine DeWitt and witnessing the outcome of this placement, we cannot help but feel that perhaps some mistakes are meant to be. We wish you both every happiness in your marriage and apologize for the distress our errors may have caused. Respectfully, Howard Pemberton, Senior Agent, Western Matrimonial Agency." Clara read the letter twice, then looked at Ethan with wonder in her eyes. "They admitted they were wrong. He was lying, just like I said." "I know." Ethan took the letter and tossed it into the fire burning in the hearth, watching it curl and blacken. "I believed you before this letter came, but I'm glad you have the satisfaction of being vindicated." "You really believed me? Even without proof?" "I chose to believe you. That's different." He pulled her into his arms. "I chose to trust what I knew of your character over what some stranger claimed. I chose faith over fear, and I'll keep choosing it every day for the rest of our lives." Clara buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of leather and wood smoke and home. "I love you, Ethan Mercer." "I love you too, Clara Mercer." He tilted her face up to kiss her. "My perfectly ordered, absolutely right, couldn't have planned it better wife." From the kitchen came the sound of children's laughter, Tommy teaching Sarah some song he'd learned, their voices high and sweet and innocent. The house hummed with life, with love, with the beautiful ordinariness of a family going about their day. And standing there with his wife in his arms and his children's laughter filling the air, Ethan Mercer understood with perfect clarity that the best things in life were often the ones you never planned for. The unexpected graces, the mistakes that turned out to be miracles, the wrong girl who was actually, impossibly, perfectly right. Outside, the prairie stretched vast and golden under the autumn sun. Winter would come soon with its challenges and hardships. But inside the Mercer house, warmth and love would keep the cold at bay. Because they'd learned the most important lesson of all, that family wasn't about perfection or replacing what was lost. It was about choosing each other, day after day, broken pieces and all, and building something beautiful from whatever materials you had. As the sun set on another day in Wyoming territory, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Clara stood at the window watching the light change. Sarah was on her hip, Tommy leaning against her side, and Ethan's arm around her shoulders. A family. Her family. Hard-won and deeply cherished, and absolutely, perfectly hers. "Mama?" Sarah's small voice broke the comfortable silence. "Are you happy?" Clara looked at each face in turn. This brave little girl who'd accepted her so completely, this serious boy who'd given her the gift of his trust, This wounded man who'd found the courage to love again. Her family, her home, her second chance at life. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm happier than I ever dreamed possible." And it was true. Every word of it. Because sometimes the wrong girl at the depot turned out to be exactly the right woman for the job. Sometimes mistakes became miracles. Sometimes broken hearts could heal and love again. Sometimes, despite all the odds and all the obstacles, hope won. And that was the greatest gift of all. Years later, when Tommy and Sarah were grown with children of their own, they would tell the story of how their father almost sent their mother away. How fear nearly destroyed the family before it fully formed. How love and courage and second chances had brought them all together under that cottonwood tree. And they would end the story the same way every time. She cried that Papa ordered the wrong girl, but he smiled and said, "No, I ordered right." And he had. He just didn't know it yet. The end.